This inmate forced these blue balls down the teacher's throat, but he instantly regrets it when the student grabs him by his precious hair and snaps his neck in a literal blink. Fogland, the largest prison on Earth, was located right on top of a meteorite site in the middle of nowhere. It held the most deranged, world-class prisoners. However, the inmates were simply lacking in education. At least, that's what this guy thinks. A bunch of teachers were brought in to lecture the inmates, and they even made a nice banner for them. The class was isolated, created behind heavy reinforced glass, and the first victim was already inside. The guard instructed him not to leave his seat for any reason until the end of class signal sounded. The inmates finally arrived. Him, and Mutant 1 and 2 over here. From their faces, these guys didn't seem teachable, and even this man knew. He steadied his resolve and introduced himself as Dante Kang, their science teacher. He introduced their first topic on the growth potential of a sweet potato, but this potato right here was pissed because he felt offended. Dante tried to calm him, but everyone else suddenly started eating their potatoes and raging in the class. The teacher grew frantic, unaware of how he could control the class, but suddenly, one man called to Dante and told him to cut out that stupid talk and just tell them how to make fog. Dante was confused, and the inmates became even more enraged. Before Dante could plead his case, the so-called reinforced glass in front of him shattered before his eyes. An inmate had struck it with just his head and screamed at Dante. Dante immediately called the control room, and they stormed in quickly, using their weapons to instantly neutralize every inmate in the room. Dante could barely process the scene. He screamed in fear, wondering how they could waste the prisoners behind the reinforced glass without a single thought. But he was wrong. One of the inmates suddenly grabbed a soldier by the head in a vulnerable position and crushed it in his palm. The men who had planned to neutralize the inmates were the ones being schooled right before Dante's eyes, and this was the beginning of his new reality. Dante could barely process the unfolding chaos as he stared forward, his eyes locking onto one particular man who remained eerily calm amidst the madness. As he gradually lost consciousness, the image of that one composed figure being the last thing he saw before passing out. Time passed before the scene shifted to a different room, finding Dante unconscious on the floor. He opened his eyes slowly, catching sight of the back of a figure squatted on the ground. Dante saw a man in a prison suit who turned to look back at him, leading to a moment of clear confusion between them. Dante swung his legs down from the bed and asked who the man was, huffing and puffing as he scanned the room frantically. He spotted the prison toilet and the door, causing him to stand and scream, demanding to know where they were. The man calmly explained that this was his house. When the man offered no further response, Dante realized he was facing a prisoner. He recalled the order to shoot and the subsequent slaughter of the guards, a memory that had caused him to pass out from pure shock. Standing before the unknown inmate, Dante asked if they were currently inside the prison, prompting a silent nod. He clarified if they were specifically inside Fogland. Dante asked if the inmate was the one who had brought him there, which resulted in another nod. When Dante asked why, the man extended his hand while holding the potato from the earlier lecture, asking Dante to teach him how to grow sweet potatoes. This request pushed Dante into a state of indignation, causing his voice to shake as he shouted about being dragged into a den of psychopaths over a stupid potato. He gripped his head in frustration, thinking that the ethics teacher had been right about these people not being human, which led him to the terrifying conclusion that he was going to die. His panic took a sharp turn into suspicion as he looked at the man's right arm, wondering if he was hiding a gun or a knife. Dante suddenly dashed forward and struck the guy with his body, causing the inmate to fall over. Dante quickly grabbed him by the neck to choke him into unconsciousness, justifying the violence by telling himself this man was weak compared to the monsters he had seen earlier. He focused on seizing the weapon from the right sleeve, only to notice the fabric flapping strangely, causing the realization to hit that the man was actually missing a limb. Shocked by the discovery, Dante used a rope to tie the man's left arm to the bed, offering a hollow apology for the violence while blaming the inmate's stupidity for the kidnapping. He found the entire situation absurd, looking at the man with annoyance and stating that he refused to teach brainless people. Dante suggested the man should just eat himself for better nutrition. Definitely not the vibe for a teacher-student relationship. He began questioning the silent prisoner about guard rotations and meal times, assuming the door would be locked. But as he peered through the viewing port, he saw nothing but thick, unending fog. This isolation caused him to scream for help, yet when he pulled on the door, it swung open freely, revealing an open space that left him stunned. He looked out to see a vast area that looked like an entire village disguised as a prison, causing his legs to give way as he collapsed in shock. Dante began to scream again, accusing the man of taking him somewhere that wasn't a prison, but the inmate suddenly reached out and covered Dante's mouth. The man told him to shut up and stay quiet if he wanted to stay alive, leading to a struggle where Dante tried to pull the hand away, claiming he was a different class of citizen than the society's garbage around them. Just then, a towering, wide-framed man approached, causing Dante to tear up in fear. When the one-armed inmate insulted the newcomer by calling him a pig, the giant responded by striking Dante squarely in the face, causing him to pass out instantly. When Dante woke up again, he had been dragged back into the room by one arm. He complained bitterly that the guy outside had stolen his clothes, as he blamed the inmate's lack of a brain for picking a fight with a monster. The inmate remained silent before suddenly starting to unzip his own uniform, causing Dante to scream and apologize frantically. To his surprise, the man simply handed over his clothes, telling Dante to put them on, which left him completely baffled. As Dante dressed, he worried that a rescue team wouldn't recognize him in prison rags, but the man informed him that there was no rescue team because the guards had all been killed. He advised Dante that standing out was a bad idea in Fogland, eventually pulling out another set of shabby clothes for himself and suggesting it was time to eat. Dante followed him out, wondering if he might find help at the cafeteria despite the eerie sounds echoing from the fog outside. Meanwhile, the large man who had punched Dante was humming happily, admiring the fit of the stolen clothes, thinking how cool he looked and regretting not taking even more. His celebration was interrupted by a lanky, long-haired man and his gang, who called him Honey and asked where he got the outfit. The man bowed and informed his boss that a nerd with glasses had just moved into Tofu Village. The boss laughed, realizing that was where Dante was hiding, while the subordinate bragged about taking the fancy clothes immediately. This boast caused the boss to strike the man in the head with his sword, driving it in further and causing him to fall dead to the ground. Standing over the body, the boss smiled, finally having found the one he referred to as Teacher. A forest of gray cement loomed overhead, inhabited by creatures with skin like camouflage and the starving eyes of beasts. This was the reality of the fog space, causing Dante to question if the beings around him were even human. The sight of even the pigeons sharing this unsettling appearance filled him with dread. Fogland felt less like a prison and more like a vicious, overgrown jungle. Dante began to question if this was truly a prison. His friend responded with confusion, causing Dante to snap that the situation was undeniably weird. This gruesome sight caused Dante to scream, questioning how a facility supposedly built by the United Nations could be run in such a horrific manner. His companion warned him that his voice was too loud, prompting Dante to drop into a frantic whisper. He scolded himself for his own stupidity, wondering why he expected a kindly explanation in a place like this. The yard was filled with inmates scattered about their own business, yet as Dante walked further inside, he noticed they were actually lining up for food. This structured behavior made the environment look more normal than he had anticipated. When he spotted a soldier's cap on a man at the front of the line, he felt certain he was saved, deciding to act as civilized as possible to prove he was different from the other prisoners. While Dante plotted his rescue, his friend was busy trying to secure an extra ham, resulting in the guard striking him on the head. When it was finally his turn, Dante approached the man and asked if he was a prison guard. Receiving no answer, he leaned in and whispered that he was Dante Kang, a science teacher assigned to the inmate education project who had been kidnapped during a riot by the man in the masked prison suit. He urged the guard to contact his superiors, convinced they must be looking for him, but the man remained silent. Suddenly, the guard began to drool, causing Dante to realize that the man was actually high on the fog, just like everyone else. Before Dante could process this red flag behavior, the guard struck him with a spoon and ordered him to get out if he wasn't going to eat. Dante sat at a table in a daze. He couldn't understand why a man in a guard uniform with a visible badge was acting this way, leading to the sinking realization that no officers were coming to save him. He felt screwed, fearing he would be stuck in this space forever. In a last-ditch effort, he turned to the black-masked guy and addressed him as a student, offering a deal. Dante promised to teach him how to grow as many sweet potatoes as he wanted, if the man would help him escape. The black-masked guy looked at him with confusion, causing Dante to hope he could use the man's perceived ignorance to his advantage. However, the inmate dashed that hope by asking if Dante thought he was an idiot for suggesting such a trade over potatoes. Dante scrambled to explain that since the man had kidnapped him specifically to learn, there would be no reason for him to stay once the lessons were finished. The man stared at him for a moment and stated that to leave Fogland, one had to become the supreme leader, Confused, Dante asked if he meant becoming the boss of the entire place, to which the man replied that someone like Dante could never achieve that. Dante insisted he had no interest in power, asking if only the leader could contact the outside world. The man simply raised his hand and spoke of ascending, or falling, as the only way out before returning to his meal. When Dante demanded a clearer explanation, the man stopped responding entirely. This lack of cooperation caused Dante to strike the table and stand up, declaring that he was leaving the filthy place, and that the inmates would regret it once the law judged them. As Dante walked off, a voice suddenly screamed out for the teacher, asking if Mr. Kang was there. Dante's heart leaped as everyone's attention shifted to the source, causing him to believe the rescue team had finally arrived. He screamed back, identifying himself as Dante Kang, the 32-year-old science teacher, and ran toward the call. However, the man waiting for him was not a soldier, but a towering figure, wearing multiple layers of numbered prison clothes. The giant smiled down at him, causing Dante to shrink back in fear as the man mentioned it had been a long time, and asked if Dante remembered him from the sweet potato class. Dante realized he could never forget this man. The last time he had seen someone that massive was during the riot. Nearby inmates began whispering about the man's shoulders, identifying him as Shoulder Hyung, one of the 6 shoulders of Cell 0. They referred to him as the Tower. Dante stood frozen as the memory of the riot flooded back, recalling how this man had used another inmate as a human shield against gunfire. The Tower had complained about the rudeness of being stripped down and faced with guns, leading to an unbelievable display of violence. He had reached into his mouth and pulled out a long sword, using it to slice the soldiers into pieces in a single, dancing strike. The memory caused Dante's knees to give out, and he fell to the ground. He managed to ask why the man was looking for him, to which the Tower replied that they needed to continue the class. He added that he was no longer interested in sweet potatoes, instead pulling out 3 strange blue fog balls and telling Dante that it was time for a real lesson on how to make fog. When the Tower produced 3 balls of fog in front of Dante, the entire room shifted its focus, as every inmate present became instantly eager for the glowing objects. Dante glared at the blue lumps in confusion, suddenly recalling the earlier demands to stop the nonsense and explain how to make fog. He asked the Tower what these blue lumps actually were, causing the giant to scream in disbelief and question how a science teacher could be so ignorant, asserting that teachers were supposed to know everything, leading Dante to shout back that he had never encountered anything like this in the outside world. The Tower explained that 6 soldiers had gathered specifically for Dante's class, a revelation that caught Dante completely off guard. Before he could process the gravity of the situation, the Tower grabbed him and declared they would simply learn from this point forward, causing him to thrust the fog close to Dante's mouth. The Tower rubbed the fog against Dante's teeth, and everyone clearly wanted a piece of the fog. Dante pushed the hand away, stating he didn't want it, causing the fog to fall to the ground. The sight of the falling blue lumps triggered a total frenzy as the inmates ran toward the fog like deranged humans. Dante watched in surprise as they struggled for the fog, punching one another in a desperate brawl. The Tower observed the chaos, noting that everyone wanted fog because it was considered gold and a blessing from the gods. One old man managed to eat it, causing the others to complain and scream at the old geezer to spit it out. They rushed the man, biting and tearing his body to pieces, yet the old man simply smiled through the beating, which Dante found incredibly strange. The Tower dismissively remarked that the dirty tofu village people were getting excited over a single lump, adding that while the old man would live in heaven today, he would gain incredible talent if he had more. He asked Dante if he was finally interested, but the sheer brutality of the scene caused Dante to vomit on the ground. Overwhelmed by the horror of the space, Dante begged to be allowed to go home, pleading that he wasn't a scientist and couldn't create something he had never seen before. The Tower found this admission ridiculous, claiming he had once seen a drama where a teacher made and sold medicine. Dante desperately tried to explain that the person in the drama was likely a chemistry professor and that his own status as a high school teacher without a doctorate made him different, causing the entire space to fall into a heavy silence as everyone stared at him. The Tower asked if Dante was admitting to being incompetent, noting that he had hoped finding the teacher first would allow him to become the supreme leader. Disappointed, the Tower pulled the long sword back out of his mouth and prepared to swing, calling Dante a useless bastard. In that moment, Dante's mind flashed back to his past, remembering his parents screaming that he was a worthless stain on the family name for failing to get a PhD. His father, famous enough to be on TV, and his mother, a doctor of law, had no patience for a son who couldn't pass a single paper in 6 years. Even his brother's defense felt like an insult. Dante recalled a tense family dinner where he tried to justify his job at FOGLAND as a noble mission to educate the underserved. His brother had mocked his grand words, accusing him of using eccentric acts to justify his incompetence and inferiority complex. Back in the present, Dante realized his brother had been right about his recklessness, as his choices were about to result in his miserable death in this filthy place. He smiled sadly at the irony of his downfall as the sword dropped toward his head. Suddenly, one arm acted with bet-level precision. He tossed a fork from the back with such force that it intercepted the strike, causing the fork to tear through the tower's hand and fly across the room to pierce the opposite wall. The tower began to scream in agony, clutching the stump where his hand had been as he wondered if someone had smuggled a gun into the prison. Before the situation could settle, one arm reached out and grabbed the tower by the hair. Dante looked up in shock, never expecting such overwhelming power to come from the man who he had dismissed. The crowd stood frozen in shock as one arm seized the tower's head, driving his knee upward with a force that caused a sickening crack to echo through the space. This was followed immediately by the snapping of the giant's spine, causing the great warrior to fall limp as one arm literally brought him down. The inmates erupted into cheers, declaring that a new shoulder had been born, leading them to dash toward one arm to greet their new hero and demand to know his name. One arm ignored them, simply telling Dante that it was time to go before grabbing him and running off. Once they reached a different, quieter space outside, Dante realized he was still alive and felt a surge of happiness. Sitting beside him was one arm, who had finally removed his mask. Dante eventually questioned if the sweet potato story had been a lie, asking why the man had even signed up for the class, if he wasn't after fog like everyone else. One arm then asked Dante if he could actually make fog, which led to a moment of panic where Dante screamed and begged for his life, apologizing out of fear that he might be killed for his inability to do so. One arm looked at him with genuine confusion, explaining that he had only joined the class because they were giving out new clothes. He recalled a line blocking his way earlier where a man had told him not to cut in, explaining that people from the outside were coming to teach something and the competition for spots was intense. When the man mentioned they were providing new clothes so the inmates would look presentable for the teachers, one arm had instantly entered the line, sharing the man's excitement about learning something amazing for the first time in years. Dante was surprised to learn this was the sole reason for his enrollment, leading him to ask why the man had saved him. One arm clarified that he wasn't saving Dante, but rather saving his new clothes, pointing out that Dante had never actually taught him anything and had even pissed on his new outfit during the chaos. Dante felt deeply embarrassed as the realization hit. Nearby, the scene shifted to an inmate who was now sobbing and entirely naked, suggesting that Dante's new clothes had been acquired through some very questionable means. Despite the awkwardness, Dante held a hose and poured water over the soiled garments, promising to wash them clean. He noticed the ragged clothes the man still wore and asked if there was a story behind them, wondering why he kept them after getting a new set. One arm simply pointed to the number 182 on the fabric, asserting that since both sets bore his number, they both belonged to him. Dante was dazed by this simple logic. He offered to wash the dirty set as well, especially since the man's missing arm made the task difficult, causing one arm to stand there naked while Dante worked. Later that evening, back inside the prison cell, Dante hung the laundry to dry and checked the time, realizing it was past midnight. He felt frustrated at having spent an entire day locked up, especially with the knowledge that the monsters known as the soldiers were likely searching for him. His stomach growled, causing him to regret passing on the disgusting soup from earlier. But then he spotted a sweet potato on the ground. He considered taking a small bite since the deal seemed to be off, but as he reached for it, one arm struck it out of his hand. The man warned Dante that he had almost killed him for touching the potato, causing Dante to plead for just one bite of the staple crop. One arm refused, pointing out that he had already carved his number, 182, into it. Dante found the man's behavior unbelievable, noting that his vocabulary and logic were no better than a child's. The man then told Dante to close his eyes, because he was going to hide his potato, acting with the frantic energy of a primitive caveman. Dante realized he could turn this behavior to his advantage, asking what would happen if the sweet potato died. He explained that by carving a number into it, the man had created a scar that would cause the potato to catch a deadly disease called browning. This information clearly rattled one arm, leading Dante to play hard to get by suggesting the deal was off and he shouldn't be sharing secrets. He eventually relented, telling the man that the plant needed sunlight, which was blocked by the thick fog of the village. Dante suggested they head toward the entrance of Fogland, where the air was thinner and drier, noting that even their laundry wasn't drying well in the village. A man was hammering away at a tall structure while groans echoed nearby. The tower was seated there, his head supported by a construction meant to heal his shattered neck. He asked how long the healing would take, only to be told they had hired the best architects for the job. The tower called them morons, reminding them he needed a doctor, not an architect. He wondered how his spine, which was stronger than reinforced steel, had been shattered in a single hit. He declared he no longer cared about the teacher and wanted to catch the brat he suspected of hogging all the fog. Suddenly, a voice interrupted, mocking the tower for hiding in his hideout like a rat. It was the man who had broken the unbreakable glass, and his arrival surprised everyone. He brought up the rumors of the tower's shattered neck and demanded information on the teacher's location, citing their alliance. The tower refused, stating his intention to become the supreme leader alone. The hound grabbed his hammer instantly and grabbed him by the hair. The man mocked the tower for dreaming too big given his current state. Ignoring the giant's plea not to attack an injured person, the hound struck the tower squarely in the chest. It was a complete reality check for the fallen giant. It didn't take the hound much time to massacre everyone within that space, leaving a trail of destruction before he finally walked out. He informed the men waiting for him outside that it was time to move, stating they were heading to Tofu Village, which resulted in the group riding off on their motorbikes. The scene shifted back to the village where Dante was walking beside the masked man. Dante questioned him about the contents of the bag he was carrying, noting that it was incredibly heavy, causing the man to simply claim it was his. When Dante asked why the bag had the number 182 written on it, the man offered no response, leading Dante to ask for his name instead. The masked man finally revealed his name as One Arm, which made Dante wonder if it was some kind of joke. One Arm insisted that was simply what people called him, prompting Dante to remark that such a label was uncultured and unrefined. He decided he would call him Mr. 182 instead, subsequently asking why he wore a bag over his head and if he was a thief or a robber. Dante questioned how he had ended up in Fogland, to which Mr. 182 claimed he had always been there. Dante felt confused by the idea of someone always living in such a place, but Mr. 182 grew annoyed, asking why there were so many questions, and stating that as a teacher, Dante should already know things. Dante clarified that teachers were not omniscient, causing Mr. 182 to tell him to shut up because he talked too much and his voice was too loud. Dante defended himself by saying the volume came with the job, resulting in the two of them glaring ahead and walking in silence. Eventually, Dante stopped and dropped the bag, pleading for a break because he was so hungry he could hardly walk. He looked up while sweating, asking how far the gate was, noting they had been walking for at least 2 hours, only to feel like they were going in circles. One Arm admitted he didn't actually know where the gate was, causing Dante to scream in frustration. He asked why the man hadn't mentioned that earlier, lamenting that they had been walking for nothing. Dante fell flat to the ground, declaring he wouldn't take another step unless One Arm carried him or found him food to save his sweet potato. Suddenly, One Arm fell limp to the ground as well. Dante jumped up and asked what he was doing, but One Arm did not respond. Dante ran over and shook him, tapping his face frantically and screaming to know what was wrong. He felt a surge of genuine terror at the thought of being left alone, begging the man to open his eyes. Just then, someone whooshed into the scene from above, landing behind Dante with a heavy thud. Before Dante could process the arrival, the stranger reached out and physically pried Dante's eye open to inspect him, much to Dante's shock. The man noted that Dante was just a normal person, causing Dante to ask for clarification. The man apologized, explaining he had heard loud shouting and decided to check it out. The scene then cut to a kitchen where Dante was frantically gobbling up food. A lady standing beside the man who had rescued Dante told him to slow down, mentioning there was more in the pan. Dante thanked them, feeling relieved to have finally encountered some civilized folks. The man introduced himself as Rambutan, and the lady as Lychee. Dante introduced himself as well, remarking that it was the first time he had met people who could hold a proper conversation, and expressing surprise at finding women in the area. Lychee smiled and asked if she looked like a woman, explaining she cut her hair short to look like a guy because being a woman attracted too much unwanted attention in Tofu Village. Rambutan explained they were from the inner area, noting that they stopped calling places towns or villages as they approached the center. Dante asked if there were more civilized people in the center, causing Rambutan to laugh and clarify that Tofu Village was specifically full of bums and outcasts. Rambutan then asked if Dante was new and why he hadn't started using fog yet. Dante revealed he wasn't a prisoner, clarifying that he had been kidnapped by one arm. This revelation surprised Rambutan, who asked if Dante was one of the teachers who had been snatched. Dante asked how they knew about the incident, leading Rambutan to explain that everyone knew because the Six Shoulders had set up the whole thing, taking over the line so no one else could take the classes. Dante was horrified, wondering what the management could have been thinking. Rambutan marveled at the fact that he was looking at one of the targets, causing Dante to cautiously ask if Rambutan was a mole for the soldiers. Rambutan denied it, and Lychee asked how the kidnapping happened, noting that one arm didn't look like a soldier. Dante explained that one arm only wanted him to teach him how to grow a sweet potato, causing Rambutan to burst into laughter. He asked if Dante was serious, questioning if the kidnapping was really over a potato and not fog. Dante tried to laugh as well. Dante felt like crying, even with a smile on his face, thinking that the whole situation felt like a twisted comedy. Lychee eventually told Rambutan to stop laughing, since Dante was clearly upset. Rambutan asked if one arm was holding him captive, but Dante explained he was trying to use the man as a bodyguard. He mentioned how one arm had suddenly fainted, wondering if it was heat stroke. Lychee corrected him, explaining the man was in limbo, which was a form of fog withdrawal. They described it as a syndrome where people without fog lose consciousness, warning that experiencing it too often would eventually melt a person's brain. Dante asked what fog actually was, causing a brief pause as the two looked at each other. Rambutan explained that fog was a drug given by the god of talents, capable of awakening hidden potential or boosting existing skills. Dante asked if that was even possible, leading Rambutan to stand up and declare that it not only allowed people to break past human limits, but that they intended to use those powers to break out of prison. Dante was stunned by their words. The scene cut to the prison, where the Hound opened the door to One Arm's cell, only to find it empty. He sniffed the air and noted that neither One Arm nor the teacher had gotten far. Meanwhile, the soldiers of Sector 0, including the Bone Eater, the Faceless, the Fuzzy Back, and the Drillhead, were all still in Tofu Village, actively hunting for Dante as the pieces of the puzzle finally began to fit together. Rambutan and Lychee revealed their plan to use their powers to break out of prison, leaving Dante visibly confused. He questioned their intent to escape, prompting Rambutan to ask if he wanted to join them. Dante hesitated, worrying that joining inmates in a prison break would result in him serving actual time for aiding an escape. He informed them that he appreciated the offer, but was an innocent civilian, stating his intention to speak with the prison guards or the administration first. He considered the risks, thinking that even if they attempted to leave, the plan could easily fail. Rambutan told him to forget about the administration, insisting that no one would ever set foot in Fogland to help him. He explained that fog addiction was a very real danger, asserting that once someone entered this place, they could never live without it again. Dante was surprised, arguing that he had never used fog and never intended to, but Rambutan clarified that intention had nothing to do with it. He pointed out that Dante had been there for 3 days, and asked if he had noticed the thick mist hanging over the area. This mist was composed of fog particles, a revelation that shocked Dante. Rambutan described fog as a gift from God that awakened talent, noting that while it took a large amount to fully awaken a skill, the particles in the mist were enough to cause addiction. The mist slowly seeps into the lungs, causing a person to crave more, and Rambutan added that those who could not afford fog eventually ended up in limbo. Dante panicked as he asked if he was already addicted and screwed. Rambutan offered a small bit of hope, saying he still had a chance, though he explained that the addiction truly began the moment a person experienced limbo for the first time. Since everyone has a different tolerance, he couldn't say exactly how much time Dante had left, only that it wasn't much. Dante then asked if it was safe for Rambutan and Lychee to escape, since they were already addicted. Lychee admitted they were in trouble, but mentioned they had never heard of anyone actually leaving. She suggested that perhaps the addiction would improve with time, or that researchers might find an antidote once they reported the symptoms. She told Dante they had promised each other not to die in Fogland, and Rambutan added that while they might face endless limbo outside and even forget each other, They wanted to be free together under the blue skies. Dante found their sentiment a bit cringy, but he could tell they were serious and deeply moved by the way they hugged. In that moment, one arm woke up and stared at them. Dante was shocked by the man's glare, causing everyone's attention to turn toward him. Dante became frantic, thinking he had no more time to waste on sweet potatoes. He worried about what one arm would do if he found out about the escape plan, fearing the man might attack or kill him, especially remembering how he had struck the tower. Just then, one arm rummaged through his pocket and asked if the sun was still up. Rambutan noticed Dante shaking and told him not to be frightened, dismissing one arm as a mere fog zombie. He explained that once someone falls into limbo, they lack strength until their next dose of fog, suggesting that even Dante could beat him. Dante was relieved to hear this, mentioning he had feared the man might hurt them. Rambutan raised his leg, offering to kill one arm right then and there while looking intently into the man's eyes. Dante quickly intervened, saying it wasn't necessary to kill him. He walked up to one arm and stated that he was leaving because he had no intention of staying in this place. He suggested they go their separate ways, causing one arm to ask about the sweet potato. Dante exhaled, grabbed the potato, and placed it inside a cup of water he had borrowed. He stretched his hand toward one arm, explaining that the potato would grow just fine in the water, but would still need sunlight. He grabbed one arm by the shirt and pulled him, telling him he better get going before the sun set. One arm admitted he didn't know the way, but Dante responded that he couldn't help with that. Dante then screamed for Rambutan to get the man out of there, declaring he was going with them and Lychee, regardless of the risk of being shot or arrested. During the ruckus, the cup fell as Dante threw one arm out of the room, causing the water to spill and the potato to hit the ground. One arm looked at the lifeless-looking potato in front of him, the light nearly gone from his eyes. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood when someone had asked if he knew what a puppy or a cat was. He had been told that a puppy was an animal like a crow, though the person had described them as furry, fluffy, and cute, explaining that they could understand people. This person, while crying, had tapped one arm on the head and promised that one day when she was out of there, she would raise a puppy. Remembering this, one arm extended his hand toward the fallen potato and told it to come here. Suddenly, the scene shifted to a different area where a measuring tape was being used. Someone noted that a target had moved 8 inches, while another person nearby questioned if the figure had moved at all. Before them stood a tall figure that held onto the headless body of a random person on the street. The two men observing the figure remarked that the person must have tried to break out and was stopped before they could get anywhere. Dante slammed the door shut behind him, returning to Rambutan and Lychee with a sudden focus, asking what the plan was and how exactly they were going to get out of there. Rambutan offered to demonstrate, steadying himself while Dante watched in confusion as the man's legs began to bulge with a heavy, unnatural power. Suddenly, Rambutan thrusted himself upward with such force that he pierced straight through the ceiling, destroying it in the process and causing Dante to scream in genuine bewilderment. While Dante was busy losing his mind, Lychee remained perfectly calm. She explained that Rambutan's talent was an incredible jumping ability, allowing him to reach crazy heights, which was currently being proven by the gaping hole above them. Their plan was as simple as it was bold. They were just going to jump over the massive walls. Once they were outside, Lychee tapped her head just as a strange light pierced through her eyes. This light sprung forth, allowing her to begin sketching a full, detailed map of the entire space in front of her. Dante was stunned, realizing her talent worked like a human camera, capturing a scene and instantly turning it into a drawing. He asked if it was a map of the entire Fogland, but she clarified that she had only drawn what she saw on their way from the center to this area. It was only a small fraction of the territory. Lychee noted that despite the scale, they had actually come quite far considering the size of Tofu Village, and might soon see the edge of the region. Rambutan approved of the progress, but Dante noticed something missing. He took the pen and began to draw 4 figures in the corner of the pages, pointing out that there were 4 vagrants at that location. Lychee screamed and snatched the pen back, telling him not to dawdle on her map, but Dante persisted, noting that she had marked other potential dangers as well. He pointed to one specific mark, asking what it was, but the two of them just glared at him, clearly uncomfortable. Rambutan dismissed the question, stating it didn't matter since they would be out of there soon anyway, before asking Lychee which way they needed to go. It was a strange moment, but Lychee pointed the way and called out to the teacher as Rambutan grabbed both of them and sprung forward in a massive leap. The scene shifted to a new space littered with dazed men on the ground, but the vibe was quickly ruined when One Arm walked into the area. He approached the group and asked if they had any fog, causing the men to mock him and ask who this loser was. One Arm repeated his question, leading the men to call him a moron and ask what he thought the answer was. One Arm then calmly stated he could just check their pockets, which caused one of the men to dash forward and punch him. The man began stepping on One Arm while he was down, screaming that he had picked the wrong day to mess with him because the hunger was already killing him. Another man behind him suggested that beating him was one way to deal with the hunger, and proposed they just eat him instead. He pulled out a spoon and taunted One Arm, claiming that human flesh contains fog, and that was why the Bone Eater ate people. The other men tried to change the conversation, telling them to hang in there because lunchtime was coming, but the aggressors called them cowards, insisting they needed all the fog we can get. One of them walked up to One Arm with a vicious smile, debating whether to slit his throat and drink his blood or just gouge out his eyes. Suddenly, the Hound appeared out of nowhere and slapped him so hard the man went flying straight into a wall. The man's friends called out to him, only to realize his ear was bleeding and his eardrum had literally popped out. They were paralyzed with fear upon recognizing the Hound, immediately assuming One Arm must be part of the Hound's crew, and they began running for their lives. The Hound bent over One Arm, calling him Paper Bag Head, and stating he had finally found him. The scene then flashed back to the chaotic events earlier in the classroom. After the Hound had smashed through the glass, gunshots were firing everywhere while he grabbed the unconscious Dante. He had dashed out of the space, thinking to himself that victory was his, and mocking the other inmates for being too busy fighting guards to notice the teacher was gone. He had been privately fuming, feeling like the tower had used his crew members as bullet sponges, leading him to conclude their alliance was officially over. However, he had quickly realized someone was chasing him. He skidded to a stop and turned to face his pursuer, asking which crew the man belonged to, guessing he was with the Bone Eater or the Drillhead. The man in front of him was One Arm, who was standing there holding a potato. One Arm asked if a sweet potato was an animal, leaving the Hound completely baffled. When the Hound didn't understand, One Arm suggested they should just ask the teacher. The Hound lost his patience, calling it bullshit and stating he was already pissed off, causing the Hound to dash forward in a rage. He swung a punch, but One Arm dodged it with surprising agility, causing the Hound to miss completely. In a swift countermove, One Arm flipped his fingers and struck the Hound directly in the side of his stomach, the force of the blow pushing him away and causing him to tumble across the ground in sheer pain. In that moment of distraction, One Arm had grabbed Dante and vanished. Back in the present, the Hound grabbed One Arm by the head, his anger boiling over as he demanded to know how the teacher was doing. The Hound reached out and yanked the black bag off One Arm's head, only to find the man's face covered in drool, causing him to remark on what a loser he looked like. He asked One Arm if he was in limbo or if he simply needed fog, but the scene quickly shifted to a different space where the mood was heavy. The crew was mourning the passing of a member named D-Dot, paying their respects in a somber atmosphere. However, the peace didn't last long, as the crew began taking their frustration out on One Arm, who had been brought back to their hideout. They punched him repeatedly and began breaking his fingers, threatening that if he kept being stubborn, they would move on to breaking his toes. They were desperate to find Dante's location, but One Arm remained unfazed, simply telling them to give him fog if they wanted him to talk. The Hound sat nearby with his new second-in-command, a man named Slick. Looking at the battered prisoner, Slick wondered aloud if One Arm even felt pain at all, suggesting to the Hound that they were wasting time and should just give him the fog. The Hound firmly refused, ordering that One Arm never be given a single drop. Slick questioned if the Hound was actually scared of such a skinny dude, but the Hound pointed out that One Arm wasn't just some random prisoner. He noted the man's build was pushed to the absolute extreme, estimate he had less than 5% body fat with perfect muscle definition. Though the other members added that the pain of getting hit with such a physique was even worse, since there was no fat to cushion the blows, yet One Arm showed no reaction. Slick then shifted the conversation, noting that word was out about the teacher being in Tofu Village. He warned that if any of the other crews got to Dante first, they would be finished, subtly critiquing the Hound for breaking their alliance without a better plan, noting that killing the tower was a major mistake, but the Hound snapped back, asserting they had killed a brother and deserved a blood vengeance. He told Slick to stop acting like a loser, causing Slick to back off slightly while still insisting they needed a better strategy and more fog, suggesting that finding the teacher and ascending together was what D-Dot would have wanted. The Hound was pissed, who punched the table and rose, causing Slick to flinch. The Hound declared that D-Dot wouldn't die for nothing, and promised they would all ascend together. He poured beer into his mouth as a toast, and the crew joined in, weeping for their fallen comrade. Suddenly, the Hound spat the alcohol across the room, accidentally hitting a memorial poster that read R.I.P. D-Dot. The crew complained about the mess on the portrait, but the Hound told them to stop fussing, claiming he had simply choked. In reality, his mind had flashed back to the moment one arm had struck him. He realized one arm had aimed perfectly between his ribs, causing an injury to his liver that hadn't felt right since. He squeezed his beer can and threw it at one arm, shouting that while the others might be fooled, he knew that strike wasn't luck, it was pure skill. He observed that while most people in Fogland fought poorly because they relied on fog-induced powers, one arm used Krav Maga. The Hound recognized the martial arts' focus on practicality, efficiency, and targeting vital points for quick takedowns. He glared at one arm, asking if he was a soldier, but the man remained silent. The scene then cut to Rambutan, Lychee, and Dante. As they approached the exit wall, Dante felt a surge of hope, realizing they had actually made it to the edge. Suddenly, Rambutan yanked him to the side, pointing out a watchtower and wondering if anyone was inside. Dante suggested there might be guards, asking if it was a good time to part ways, but Lychee called the idea ridiculous. But strangely, as Lychee was about to warn against moving without them, they heard a voice warning that he'd be struck down by the guards as he approached. As they looked down, both Rambutan and Lychee realized someone new was standing with them, causing them to scream and dash backward in shock. Dante looked at the newcomer and asked if he was a sweet potato, which prompted the man to scream back, telling Dante not to call him that. Dante suddenly remembered him from the classroom, pointing out that the man had been in his class. Rambutan immediately shoved Dante behind him, warning that the stranger was actually one of the 6 shoulders. The man was accompanied by followers wearing emergency triangles on their heads, who quickly dashed forward and dropped the triangles to form a perimeter around Dante's group. Just then, the Potato Head emerged from the ground, introducing himself as the man closest to becoming the supreme leader. He addressed Dante as teacher and told him to come along, but Rambutan's legs suddenly went flying. He struck the drill head squarely in the face, angrily declaring that the teacher was staying with them. The drill head went flying backward into his own men, clutching his face and screaming to know who had just struck him. Rambutan told him to stay out of the situation, claiming he had found the teacher first. The drill head scoffed at the idea of a stray mutt giving him attitude, remarking that someone needed to teach the newcomer to fear the 6 shoulders. He then took a bizarre stance in his ballet flats and began to spin frantically like a ballerina. Suddenly, the man jumped upward and drilled himself into the ground with strange precision. Rambutan screamed a warning that he was coming, but as Dante struggled to grasp what was happening, the ground began to crack. The drill head drilled through the earth toward Rambutan, only to surface behind Dante in an instant while laughing. Rambutan immediately struck the spot where his opponent had emerged, but the drill head dove back inside, springing his head out of different spots while taunting Rambutan for being too slow. Rambutan struck at every opening but couldn't catch him, creating an almost comedic scene while Dante simply screamed for his life on the sidelines. The drill head eventually spotted an opening behind Rambutan's back and used his head to strike him squarely in the spine, causing Rambutan to fly through the air. Lychee screamed in terror for her companion as he took the heavy hit. The sound of her voice caused the men nearby to realize she was a woman, and they immediately turned their attention toward her. They began to harass her, pulling at her clothes and confirming her identity, while Lychee tried desperately to get away. The men asked the drill head if they should take her with them, leaving Dante paralyzed with fear for both himself and Lychee. Blaming himself for the mess, Dante grabbed a rock and threw it at one of the men holding Lychee, screaming for them to stop. The men were surprised as Dante began hurling more rocks in a blind rage, though his aim was so poor that some of the rocks actually struck Lychee in the head. But Lychee grabbed Dante's hand and told him to snap out of it, urging him to run. As they began to flee, the drill head remarked on her beauty while Rambutan slowly stood up, recovering from the spinal strike. Rambutan jolted forward to catch up with Lychee and Dante, but the drill head wasn't about to let them escape. He dashed forward, and while Rambutan managed to grab Lychee, Dante wasn't so lucky. The drill head snatched Dante and pulled him straight into the ground, jubilating as he vanished while Rambutan screamed after them, too slow to intervene. Honestly, the drillhead really just took down to earth, way too literally. The scene shifted back to the hound's hideout, where he was interrogating one arm. He leaned over, asking if the man had been in the special forces, noting that he himself used to be about the real fight before being sent to Fogland. He then ordered Slick to break one arm down, telling him to use every dirty trick in the book to ensure the prisoner didn't get any fog before slamming the door. Slick was pissed at the instructions, and when one of the men offered to take over, Slick snapped that no one takes over his job. He called the hound an irresponsible bastard who lacked leadership qualities, questioning if the supreme leader really had to be someone like him. Slick suggested that anyone could have a shot if they had enough fog. He pointed to Inko, noting his drawing skills might be a quality for a leader, and to Bulk, who could throw serious weight. Slick claimed his own IQ had been rising lately, because he has been realizing every morning how foolish the hound truly was. He argued that the age of muscles was over, and that this was the age of the brain. When Bulk asked for the plan, Slick stated he would find the teacher but wouldn't share the information with the hound, telling the others they could decide who to follow. Slick bent over one arm, pulling out a dose of fog and asking if he wanted it that badly. He told the brat he would give it to him, and the scene cut to the drillhead arriving in his underground kingdom with Dante. He showed Dante the space filled with men wearing emergency triangles, but the focus quickly returned to Slick. Slick put the fog in his own mouth and told one arm that in exchange for the drug he wanted him to work for him. He promised one arm would never go without fog again if he complied, urging him to think carefully while holding the fog on his tongue. He warned there wouldn't be another offer, and proceeded to swallow the fog himself. In a shocking instant, one arm lunged forward, forcefully ejecting the fog and tearing Slick's neck in the process. Talk about a get-it-out-of-your-system moment. One arm rendered Slick lifeless in an instant, causing the body to fall limp and backward to the ground. The crew members stared in absolute disbelief, unable to pinpoint exactly what had occurred before they began screaming Slick's name and rushing toward him. As they looked down at the body, they watched one arm chomp down on the fog ball he had snatched from Slick's very throat. He glared at them with the intensity of a predator, his vicious gaze signaling that he was ready to protect himself from any further harm. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Dante, who found himself kneeling in danger before the drillhead. Dante worried that they'd left him for worse, but his thoughts were interrupted when the drillhead asked if it was true that he could create fog. Dante remained silent, prompting the drillhead to mention rumors from Tofu Village, claiming the teacher had made fog out of nowhere, consumed it, and snapped the tower's neck. Dante was shocked by how twisted the rumors had become. He was about to deny it, but the memory of the tower's brutal reaction to his previous honesty resurfaced, causing him to fear a repeat of that violence. To save himself, he shifted his tone and calmly claimed it was all true. He spun a tale of creating a humongous piece of fog out of thin air and swallowing it whole, asserting that the tower stood no chance against his thighs. The drillhead screamed that it was bullshit, asserting that he wasn't as clueless as the other shoulders who believed in such superstitions. When Dante questioned the mention of superstition, the drillhead explained that fog wasn't man-made, but was a gift from God that had fallen from the sky 50 years ago when a giant meteor crashed in the desert. Dante realized the meteorite was the source, but the drillhead noted that after 50 years, the supply was running low and Judgment Day was approaching. This revealed to Dante that fog was a limited resource, explaining why the prisoners were so desperate to hoard it. The drillhead then ordered his men to bring in a body, which they dropped in front of Dante, causing him to scream. The man had died after taking fog, and the drillhead suggested that Dante could scientifically separate the fog from the corpse's blood. He mentioned a 3D fuse machine, which Dante corrected to a centrifuge. The drillhead insisted on extracting the blood fog concentration, believing it was soaked into the systems of heavy users. Dante laughed at the absurdity, suggesting that if concentration was the goal, they should just take deep breaths, since the mist was everywhere. This annoyed the drillhead, who grabbed Dante by the neck and explained that air couldn't be collected. It had to be scraped together and condensed down. The concept of condensing fog triggered a realization for Dante. He pictured how nighttime mist coagulates and, when heated by the morning sun, melts into drops of water. He smiled and told the drillhead that condensing the air was indeed possible. The scene then cut to the hound as he opened the door to his hideout for breakfast, only to find his entire crew dead. His eyes turned red with shock and his legs gave out, causing him to fall to the ground and scream in agony. The focus then shifted to the chow hall, where a heavy hand suddenly appeared on screen as one arm cut to the front of the line. The server asked what he wanted, telling him to get back in line, while other prisoners screamed at him for ignoring the cue. One arm responded by striking the plates in front of him, causing everyone to shrivel in fear, before repeating his demand for water. After receiving a cup, one arm returned to Rambutan and Lychee's old room. He sat alone, placing his potato in the water, just as Dante had instructed. Back at the underground kingdom, Dante watched as fog water slowly dripped from a net he had rigged. He felt a surge of excitement, thinking himself a genius for making the plan work and believing that the fog water would finally ensure no one messed with him again. However, the scene flashed back to one arm, who was glaring at the potato in the cup. He complained that it wasn't growing at all, concluding that the teacher had tricked him. While Dante was celebrating his supposed safety on one side, one arm was busy planning to kill him on the other. This guy honestly cannot catch a break. The scene shifted to Rambutan and Lychee as they arrived at a heavy gate, where they were met by a small man who skeptically questioned if they really expected him to break out of prison with them. Rambutan confirmed the plan, urging the man to leave with them and insisting they knew a way out. The man was not convinced, pulling a dagger from his pocket and telling them to cut the crap and get out of his face. Rambutan surrendered immediately, leading the group away while crows cackled in the distance. Lychee noted that even the most clueless inmates wouldn't fall for such a simple pitch, pointing out that everyone in the vicinity already knew the truth. She mentioned that the location of the drillhead's hideout was clearly marked on the map, leading them to decide that the hideout would be their next destination. At the hideout, Dante had successfully constructed a fog catcher. He had carved the bottom into a specific shape to guide the dew into a container. The high humidity caused the device to collect far more water than expected, resulting in the creation of actual fog water. The drill head was absolutely floored. The drill head dipped a finger into the liquid and slurped it, instantly declaring that it tasted like fog. The revelation sent the entire crew into a frenzy of dancing and celebration, convinced they had secured an infinite source of power. They swarmed Dante, placing flowers on his head and hailing him as the teacher before tossing him into the air. Inside the hideout, the crew provided Dante with a finely tailored suit, giving him an admirable professional appearance. The drillhead complimented the look, noting that Dante now had the white-collar vibe, and asking how he liked the tailoring. Dante felt a bit uncomfortable and moved away, though he admitted the suit was well made and felt proper. The drillhead assured him that no one would mess with him now that he was part of the crew, promising him royal treatment. Dante recalled One Arm's words about needing to become the supreme leader to escape, thinking that if the drillhead truly was the closest to that title, he might eventually be able to contact the administrators through him. The drillhead then announced a grand feast of fog, explaining that thanks to Dante, they no longer needed to save their supply. He intended to use everything they had collected for his ascension, a concept that left Dante confused. The scene shifted to a large space where all the accumulated fog had been placed in a massive pan. The crew was engaged in a festival-like atmosphere, blowing horns and drumming as they danced. The drillhead arrived and silenced the crowd, while Dante looked at the massive pile of fog and wondered if he was about to witness a massive drug party. Declaring himself the king of the underground, the drillhead told his brethren of the drill that this was the culmination of their efforts. He announced his intention to attempt ascension that very day, prompting the crew to scream their belief in his success. The drillhead began grabbing handfuls of fog, telling the teacher to watch closely as a true king was born. He started chugging and gobbling the fog as the crowd cheered, but Dante watched in horror, wondering why the man was taking it all for himself. The crew continued to scream for ascension, asking if he felt any changes. The drillhead admitted he didn't feel anything yet, and kept eating until only a few fog balls remained in the bowl. He eventually fell backward, his belly distended to the size of a massive ball. When asked if he was all right, he could barely speak, muttering that perhaps today wasn't the day despite having eaten more fog than anyone else. His followers encouraged him, claiming his potential was simply too vast, and that he could try again now that they had an infinite supply. Suddenly, someone noticed that his head looked pointier than before. The crew agreed, screaming that the ascension was happening, and asking if a new talent was awakening. The drillhead claimed he could feel the universe and was standing where the fog originated, feeling a sense of infinite enlightenment. He declared that they all lived on a blue piece of hell, but before he could say another word, his body suddenly exploded. The overwhelming amount of fog caused him to go poof, right in front of everyone, resulting in a massive backlash that caused fog to fall from the ceiling like rain. Dante remembered One Arm's warning that one either ascends or falls, realizing that their boss had officially fallen. The crew, however, was so excited by the sudden downpour of fog that they didn't even care about the death. While Dante stood traumatized, the men began munching on the fog and the remains of their fallen leader, turning the event into a literal feast. The horror only escalated as the men who ate the fog from the drillhead's body began to explode one by one. One man began to scream for everyone to stop, pleading with them to realize that eating that much fog at once would lead to their deaths. In a desperate move, he pulled at Dante and insisted that the teacher must now become their leader. Dante recoiled at the suggestion, refusing to take over for the drillhead, but the men dashed toward him anyway, chanting for him to lead them, while Dante screamed his refusal and scrambled to escape the room. As he ran, his mind began to fracture under the stress, causing him to question if he was trapped in a nightmare, urging himself to wake up as he sprinted through the darkness. In his panicked state, he envisioned his brother standing before him, repeating that he had warned him this would happen. The hallucination felt tauntingly real as Dante screamed for help, but his brother only remarked that Dante still didn't understand. He told Dante that his appearance didn't matter because it was all just a ridiculous, cowardly mask. Dante screamed for the vision to end, shouting for it to be enough. In his memory, his brother's face was a blur, a simple circle. He recalled how, when they were younger, his brother had asked why Dante drew him that way, jokingly noting that Dante would never become an artist. Now, the face in his mind kept shifting, morphing from an angry man to a clown, then to a crying woman, and finally into the face of a demon. To Dante, it had always been easier to view his brother as a mere circle, but now, that circle looked like a massive fog ball. His brother's image brought him so much despair, until he suddenly lurched awake. The nightmare faded as he looked up to see Rambutan and Lychee standing over him. Lychee noted that he had finally woken up, causing Dante to ask if the entire ordeal had been a dream. They were confused by his reaction, but explained that they had found him in the sewers near the hideout and brought him to safety. Dante realized they had truly come back to save him, and Lychee confirmed that they had an agreement to escape together. Overwhelmed with guilt, Dante apologized for delaying them, but Lychee assured him it was fine. She noted that Rambutan needed to rest as well, and that they had already moved a significant distance away. When they opened the tent, Dante saw they were camped right in front of the massive boundary wall in an area without guard towers. As they settled around a fire, Dante confirmed that the drillhead was dead and that the entire hideout had fallen into total insanity. Rambutan explained that the phenomenon was called falling dead from a fog overdose, jokingly adding that he had eaten too much once as well. Lychee corrected him, explaining that while consuming fog increases one's potential, everyone has a limit. If a person reaches that limit and continues to consume, they overdose, causing the fog to burst out of them. Lychee observed that most people don't know where their limit is, and while Master Dante might be good at certain things, even he wouldn't know his own capacity. She noted that everyone essentially waits for someone else to fall. To Dante, the idea of ascending or falling seemed like a dark metaphor where falling simply meant death. He asked if ascension meant surpassing the limit, but they clarified that it was about reaching the maximum and gaining a second talent. They explained that if someone achieves this, people will follow and worship them as a supreme leader. Rambutan noted that ascension is incredibly rare, yet people constantly risk their lives for the chance at a second talent. Rambutan described it as a legend, suggesting that one day a person with an infinite number of talents will appear to surpass the laws of the world and free them all. They believed such a person would become their god, the true supreme leader. The scene then shifted back to One Arm, who was standing atop a high tank overlooking the vast fogland. He was using his heightened senses to listen to the environment, straining to hear anything that would lead him to his target. Suddenly, the distinct sound of Dante's eyeglasses moving reached his ears. One Arm opened his eyes, a look of realization crossing his face as he finally located where Dante was hiding. In another part of the region, a woman was busy packing the remnants of fog dust in the area where the drillhead's crew had perished. She noted that the area was glowing, observing that people fall every single day. A man nearby called out to her, addressing her as a tourist and telling her not to pick up that trash. He handed her a bag of high-quality fog balls, which she accepted with approval. She then asked if they had found One Arm yet, but the man, who had striking red hair, said he wasn't sure. The woman remarked that a whole year had passed and complained that her job felt unprofitable given the rising prices. The red-haired man told her to stop talking nonsense, but she pressed him for more pay. He smiled, promising her that if she brought one arm to him, he would give her as much as she wanted. It looks like one arm has a massive bounty on his head, and the hunt is officially on. The scene shifted back to the interior of the tent where Dante sat shivering violently, the biting cold seeping into his bones and causing him to regret not changing into a warmer form when he had the chance. His misery was interrupted by the soft, intimate whispers of Rambutan and Lychee just behind him, as they affectionately checked on one another and embraced to share body heat. The proximity of their affection made Dante feel incredibly out of place and uncomfortable. Noticing his persistent shaking in the early morning light, Rambutan observed that Dante hadn't slept and commented on the chilly air, though Dante insisted everything was fine despite his obvious distress. Much later that morning, the trio finally arrived at the base of the massive exit wall that marked the boundary of Fogland. They stood in its shadow, looking up at the daunting height as Rambutan began stretching his legs to prepare for the leap. Seeing the blood-stained wall, Dante wondered what could have happened, as he didn't hear any sounds throughout the night, causing a wave of nervousness to wash over him. Seeking to be useful, he asked Rambutan if there was any way he could help, leading Rambutan to hand him a bag to hold. Rambutan then asked a surprising question, inquiring if Dante was religious. When Dante mentioned his family was Catholic but that he didn't personally believe in God, Rambutan still asked Dante to say a prayer for them, and Lychee interjected that in such desperate situations, everyone prays for a chance at freedom. Rambutan asked if Dante could lead them, and upon hearing that Dante only knew the Our Father, he declared that it would be excellent. He instructed Dante to come closer as they prepared to leave, while Lychee climbed onto Rambutan's back and urged Dante to start the prayer. As Dante began the words, Rambutan started a rhythmic count of 1, 2, 3. However, just as they were about to launch into the sky, a sudden, powerful punch flew from the periphery, causing one arm to strike Rambutan squarely in the head. The force of the blow sent them crashing back to the earth, resulting in a thick cloud of dust. As they coughed and struggled to recover, it became clear that Rambutan was badly dazed, barely able to speak. Dante, paralyzed with fear, looked through the haze to see one arm standing before them, his eyes glowing a brilliant, menacing blue. Dante asked how he had managed to find them, but one arm only glared, declaring that Dante had lied to him. Before Dante could process the accusation, one arm dashed forward with a lethal intent, causing Dante to scream and turn to run. Just as one arm closed in, Rambutan managed to snag Dante and dash away, leading to a high-speed chase. Lychee screamed in confusion, wondering why one arm had attacked them instead of just letting them jump the wall. Rambutan was equally shocked, wondering how one arm was fast enough to keep pace with his own enhanced speed, and questioning if the man possessed a specific running talent. One arm pulled up directly beside them, screaming for the teacher to stop, or he would break his leg, while Dante shouted back that he wasn't running by choice. In the heat of the chase, one arm raked Rambutan, causing him to tumble violently to the ground and leading to Dante and Lychee falling over as well. As Dante scrambled to catch his breath, one arm's leg entered his field of vision. Dante looked up and begged for calm, asking what lie he had supposedly told. One arm complained that he had provided the sweet potato with water and sunlight, yet it had failed to grow. Dante stared at him in disbelief, noting that only a single day had passed, and asking how it could possibly grow that fast. One arm dismissed the explanation as a waste of time, causing Dante to grab his own head and shake it, screaming that everything needs time to grow and that at least a week was required to see results. One arm seemed to process this, responding with a curt understanding before asking where Dante was going. Dante, puzzled, explained that he was leaving since he was no longer needed, but one arm paused, asking if his departure was because of these people, referring to Rambutan and Lychee. But Dante insisted that one arm shouldn't touch them and just let them go. But one arm asked if he wanted to die, suggesting that Dante was ready to sacrifice himself for his companions. Rambutan snapped at one arm to shut up, telling Dante to ignore the nonsense of a man whose brain was melting. He urged Dante to come back to them, but the tension in the air made Dante feel deeply uneasy. As Rambutan grabbed his hand, Lychee told him to just grab them and run. Rambutan surged forward, carrying them both while telling Dante to pray faster if he still wanted to escape. Dante confirmed that he did, but a heavy, sinking feeling settled in his gut as they rose higher and higher into the air. He thought about how much he liked Rambutan and Lychee, and how they seemed to care for him, yet the atmosphere felt wrong. Suddenly, at the apex of their ascent, Rambutan turned to Dante and whispered an apology before pushing him with full force over the cliffside. Dante screamed, asking what he was sorry for as he tumbled backward through the air. In that moment, the bag Rambutan had given him to hold tore open, causing fog balls to spill out and scatter. Those men from earlier were measuring the gargoyle's movements, noting that it had moved 30 centimeters before the gargoyle suddenly vanished from that space once more. Now, as Dante fell, that same figure, a massive, predatory being, appeared exactly where he was, opening its mouth wide to swallow him whole as he tried to escape. Dante was falling straight into the jaws of a hidden guardian, completely unaware of the monster looming right behind him. Earlier, the dust settled to reveal Lychee crouched on the ground, frantically marking her map while warning Rambutan not to touch the massive, wide-mouthed creature standing before them, which she identified as a gargoyle. Rambutan questioned if it was merely a statue, noting that it shouldn't move as long as no one crossed the wall, even going so far as to strike its leg to test if it were truly alive. Lychee pleaded with him to stop, explaining that these creatures supposedly arrived with the fog, though others believed they were security devices created by the government to prevent fog leakage from the human bodies within the zone. When Rambutan asked if the creature possessed intelligence, Lychee confirmed her belief that it could sense fog and instantly identify anyone harboring thoughts of escape. She wept as she explained that the gargoyle's presence meant they would never leave, noting that the more they desired freedom and dreamed of sunlight, the more their despair grew. Rambutan held her hand firmly, promising that he would find a way out, and urging her to trust that he would do anything for her. However, as Dante began to fall toward the gaping maw of the gargoyle, Rambutan's tone shifted into a chilling excitement, shouting that he had finally caught him. He realized his plan had worked, using the fog-filled bag and the distraction of the prayers to trick the gargoyle into believing Dante was the one attempting to escape with the fog. Exploiting this opening, Rambutan dashed downward and landed on the ground, exulting in the sight of the sunlight and believing they were finally free. His joy was short-lived. When Lychee failed to respond, he turned to find her head had been detached from her body. The trauma intensified as a colossal being appeared before him, swiftly crushing Lychee's head in an instant. Driven by a desperate need for vengeance, Rambutan swung his leg to strike the monster, but the gargoyle slowly opened its mouth and released a misty dust that instantly evaporated Rambutan's legs. Meanwhile, the second gargoyle that had swallowed Dante began to descend from the high wall. One arm stood in front of it, calling Dante an idiot and stating that it was impossible to leave the Foglands. One arm steadied himself and dashed toward the gargoyle, choosing to take a massive risk for Dante's sake. He bashed the creature's face with a punch so powerful it caused the gargoyle's eyes to bulge and its body to shatter. Despite the resulting explosion, one arm found the situation annoying and unleashed a relentless barrage of punches, screaming for the creature to break. Finally, he punched through the stone to find Dante inside, who was weeping and begging for help, admitting he had been wrong. One arm reached into the mouth, grabbed Dante, and dashed back to the ground. Dante clung to one arm's legs, terrified and confused, asking why the man looked so terrifying and why he had to endure such horrors. One arm struck Dante's head into the ground, sternly instructing him to open his eyes and repeat that he would never leave again. He emphasized that there was truly no way out, and that Dante needed to say the words if he wanted to survive. Distraught, Dante finally conceded, promising he wouldn't try to leave again. In an instant, the gargoyle vanished, leaving the space empty. Dante asked if the creature had been an illusion, and inquired if Rambutan and Lychee had managed to escape. One arm bluntly informed him that they were dead, explaining that the hollow one was no illusion, and that anyone who tried to escape, no matter their strength, would face the same fate. All that remained of the couple were their dismembered bodies, lying at the foot of the outer wall. The scene then shifted to a new location, where a man wearing a helmet, known as the Cannibal Bone Eater, stood before the woman in the brown mask. She questioned if his name was meant to be literal, or just a scare tactic. The Bone Eater suggested they find out by seeing what she tasted like, extending his tongue toward her. She recoiled in disgust, ordering him to put it away, while he remarked that she felt soft and looked tasty. The Bone Eater eventually retracted his tongue and asked what business a brave kid like her had in his territory. She presented a picture of one arm, identifying him as prisoner number 182, standing 182 centimeters tall with 2 moles on his face and a missing right arm. The Bone Eater used his tongue to take the paper, asking if he could eat the man in the photo. The lady noted that if he liked the target, there wasn't much she could do to stop him. Surprised by her composure, the Bone Eater asked who she really was, to which she replied that she was the same as him. He laughed, noting he had never met a village kid who talked like her. She corrected him, explaining that she lived in a region where only the strong survived, identifying herself as a senior of District A. This girl is definitely not here to play games. The winged gargoyle suddenly reappeared in front of the two men, leaving them paralyzed with shock. They whispered in terror that the golem had returned to ensure no one was left alive, but as they looked closer, they noticed something impossible. The creature's stone teeth were broken, leading them to wonder if the guardian of the wall had actually been injured. An old man from the crowd, known as Baba Yaga, declared it a massive omen. He began to laugh, noting that the gargoyle had finally opened its mouth after 5 years, and the smell was absolutely foul. Baba Yaga claimed that a crack had appeared in the chains of the world, and that the prophecy was unfolding, causing the onlookers to scramble to write down his every word. He cryptically announced that the bird had taken flight, and that day was finally approaching. The scene shifted back to Dante and One Arm, where Dante struggled to process the horror he had witnessed. He asked if the enormous white hollow one was the thing that had killed Lychee and Rambutan, to which One Arm confirmed that it was, though he clarified there wasn't just one of them. Dante screamed in denial, refusing to believe that such monsters existed to kill anyone trying to leave Fogland. He argued that his companions had never mentioned such a thing, but One Arm dismissed them as liars. Dante's legs gave way as he fell to the ground, crying frantically that it had to be a lie, until One Arm punched his senses back into him and told him to shut up. Later, in a different space, Dante sat quietly as they ate, trying to rationalize the experience. He theorized that the monster must be a high-tech prison security system, perhaps a machine designed to cause hallucinations in abnormal inmates. He realized with a pang of guilt that Rambutan had actually kicked him in the face to get him out of the prison's immediate reach, meaning he had essentially been used as bait. A teardrop fell from his eye as he realized he had been so obsessed with escaping that he hadn't been thinking clearly. He looked at One Arm, wondering why the man had bothered to save him. It wasn't for food, clothes, or fog. One Arm had simply been kind, even though Dante had treated him coldly. Dante noticed that One Arm's hand was severely inflated and reached out to ask what had happened. One Arm instantly hid the limb, insisting he was fine, but Dante moved closer and pointed out that the swelling was even worse than before. He told One Arm he needed a hospital, but the man claimed it was just a fracture and didn't even hurt. Dante wrapped the hand in a cloth, realizing One Arm was simply enduring the pain. When One Arm tried to fight the temporary measure so he could eat, Dante snapped at him to calm down, warning that his arm would be useless forever if he didn't get treatment. He told One Arm that they were currently just 2 weak idiots who would die at the hands of any thug they encountered. Convinced by the reality of their situation, One Arm suggested they go to the hospital. Dante was surprised to hear that a real doctor existed in the zone, and One Arm recalled fighting a doctor somewhere in Zone 0. Dante worried about how to find the place in a region so much bigger than it looked, until he remembered the bag Rambutan had given him. He searched the bag and found the papers Lychee had been working on. The map. As he pulled out the map, a few fog balls fell to the ground, immediately catching One Arm's attention. Dante recalled his mother, a devout Catholic, saying that everything happens for a reason and that every failure becomes a legacy if you stand up afterward. Looking at the map, he pinpointed the medical center and realized the map contained a wealth of information. He noted the entire structure of Fogland looked like a pizza, though only 4 zones were drawn. As he examined the paper, he found a folded patch. Peeling it back, he discovered a hidden section labeled Command Center, Fog Headquarters, right in the middle of the map. He realized this was the general headquarters that controlled everything. He excitedly turned to tell One Arm he had a plan to go to the center, only to find the man already dazed and high off the fog balls he had found on the floor. The scene cut to the information broker, Kazim, who was smiling over a bag of fog balls. He boasted about how well he had been earning and hoped to find the one-armed man quickly. His thoughts were interrupted when a subordinate announced a customer. To Kazim's absolute shock, the Bone Eater walked into the room. Kazim sat frozen, staring at the monstrous body and the lock that supposedly controlled the cannibal's gluttony. The Bone Eater showed him the picture of One Arm, leading Kazim to realize this was a double request, as the Bloodhound was also looking for the man. Sensing an opportunity, Kazim asked how much the Bone Eater would pay for the info, noting there was competition. The Bone Eater calmly replied that the price would be Kazim's life. Kazim tried to laugh it off, reminding the cannibal that attacking an informant was against the rules. But the Bone Eater simply remarked that Kazim's ear looked like a big eat, with an interesting texture. A scream echoed through the space as Kazim's cup hit the floor, followed by his own blood. The Bone Eater had taken Kazim's ear, munching on it and describing it as warm and salty. While Kazim's men rushed to help their screaming leader, the Bone Eater stood over them, ordering them to find one arm immediately, lest he start craving Kazim's flavor again. Dante was meticulously reviewing the map, his eyes tracing the paths until they landed on the area surrounding the central headquarters. He concluded that the region was completely empty, that even Lychee had been unable to reach. As he glared at a specific zone circled out on the map, Dante noted that it was designated as the Women's Wing. He reasoned that the journey must have been drawn starting from that point, and his mind began to drift back to the other lady he had met earlier. He remembered her saying, "See you later," just before a security guard had asked her to follow him. Dante wondered if her name was Lara, recalling that she was also a science teacher. He suspected for a moment that she might have been kidnapped, but he quickly tried to dismiss the thought, feeling sure that nothing bad could have happened to her. However, the reality in the Women's Wing was far more pleasant to describe, but harrowing to endure. In a frantic and cruel display, Lara was being tormented in a female prison. They had dressed her to look like a clown, specifically resembling Harley Quinn, and her tormentors were laughing at her, screaming for her to shake it harder. Lara was in a significant amount of pain, her mind racing as she fathomed how she had ended up in this position. When she had originally left the park, her route had been different from the other teachers. She had been guided by a tall guard, and Lara, being curious, had mentioned how amazing the fog phenomenon was in the middle of the desert. She had even asked what the classroom would look like. The guard had remained silent until they arrived at a massive car. With a stern glare, the guard had told her to get in. Lara had been bewildered, asking if the classroom was far away, but the guard simply referred to her as a kid and ordered her inside. Lara should have sensed the danger then. As she sat in the car, she wondered why she had been called a kid, and knew instinctively that something was wrong. The guard sitting beside her asked if she was the science teacher, and when Lara confirmed it, the guard slowly pulled down her mask. Lara felt the life drain from her face as she recognized the wide, predatory smile of the person beside her. The guard called her a little baby bird and told her they were going together to the ends of the world. It was Gary. Lara had screamed, but she was already strapped into her seatbelt with nowhere to go. She had been kidnapped and taken to Queenstown. Now, inside the prison, the atmosphere was thick, with the scent of booze and the sound of malicious laughter. One of the women mocked Lara, telling her that her movements were sagging and threatening another hit. Lara had tried to leave an impression on the other teachers before, hoping someone would find her if something went wrong, but she gathered that neither the teachers nor her family would ever be able to find her here. As Lara huddled on the floor, a lady named North walked up to her, noting the tears. When Lara tried to deny it, North threw her straight to the ground, complaining that Lara was ruining the taste of the booze they were drinking. Lara screamed as she hit the floor. North mocked her research, stating that all she saw was a girl crunched in a corner, crying all day. North pressured her, stating that Lara couldn't actually make the fog and demanding at least one result. When Lara could only cry in response, North grabbed her by her clothes and produced a knife. She declared that she had never trusted trash like Lara to be able to produce the fog, and stated that Lara had to pay the price for deceiving the boss. Lara looked up at the knife pressed against her cheek, feeling that there was no hope left. Suddenly, the heavy atmosphere shifted as Gary entered the room. Everyone was shocked as Gary, appearing monstrous with her immense, buff body, grabbed North by the head. Gary, known as the Tendon Sorcerer, was a leader of the Women's Wing who could apply strength to any part of her body at will. She told North that the joke had gone too far. Gary moved North to the side and bent down to Lara, calling her a little baby bird and asking what was going on. North tried to explain, telling Gary that Lara was lying about being able to make the fog. Gary glared at North, and in that moment of tension, Lara screamed out that she really could make it. Gary smiled down at her, satisfied that her baby bird had spoken. Gary rose up, looking down at North with a heavy presence. North, feeling the weight of Gary's authority, warned Gary that she would regret this before walking away. Gary turned back to Lara, asking if they should go. Strangely, Lara began to feel a bit more comfortable in the presence of this monstrous person. Once they were in a different place, Gary coddled her, saying she should have held Lara tight the whole time so she wouldn't get bullied. Gary questioned if the fog research was going well, reminding Lara that she had even provided a sack of sugar for the task. Gary asked if Lara truly couldn't make it, just as North had suggested. Lara felt a wave of disorientation. She told Gary it was almost done and that she just needed more time. Internally, she recognized that she was just dragging things out with excuses, knowing there was no way she could actually produce the fog. Gary suddenly stood up and screamed, reasoning that if time was all that was needed, Lara should have said so from the start. Gary dashed away frantically, claiming she would make Lara and North make up. Lara was confused, calling out for Gary to come back, but there was no response. She began to worry, thinking that any attempt at a make-up would only end poorly for her. After some time, Gary walked back into the space with a maniacal smile. When Lara asked if she had spoken to North, Gary promised she would never let anyone take her little bird's time again. Lara tried to protest, fearing her position would become even more precarious. But before she could finish, Gary revealed exactly how she had secured that time. She stretched out her hand and brought out North's severed head, holding it up by the hair. Gary glared at Lara, stating that since North was gone, Lara had plenty of time now to develop the fog. Gary began to laugh frantically, obsessed with the idea of the fog finally being made. Lara could only cry in pure shock, her mind completely baffled by the gruesome sight in front of her. The scene shifted to the heart of Fogland. Dante was walking in the strangest possible manner, attempting a bizarre blend of stealth and prisoner-like slouching. When One Arm asked what on earth he was doing, Dante explained that if one wants to hide a tree, they hide it in a forest, claiming he was simply staying in character as an inmate. One Arm, completely over the performance, told him to stop breathing because it was annoying, and kicked him in the back for being too slow. He then abruptly stopped, declaring that he wasn't going any further because he was hungry. Dante was incredulous, reminding One Arm that they were on a mission to reach the hospital and fix his wrecked limb. One Arm countered that they had already passed 2 cafeterias and insisted on stopping to eat. Dante found the fuss over food exhausting, lecturing One Arm about how dangerous the cafeterias were with so many eyes watching. He reflected on how their dynamic had shifted. Previously, they could just flow with the situation. Now, with One Arm's fighting ability compromised, their backs were against a cliff. Any further retreat meant death, leaving them with no choice but to move forward. Meanwhile, at the information broker's office, a masterpiece of collaborative intelligence, the staff was reeling over a discovery in the prisoner registry. The system usually reissues the numbers of deceased prisoners to new arrivals, but the record for number 182 had been marked as dead for 22 years without ever being reissued. While some speculated he might have just stolen a rare vintage tag, Kazim noted that the man was wearing brand new clothes issued by the system, meaning the number had to be legitimate. They marveled at his youthful appearance despite the white hair, jokingly suggesting he had gained a talent of youth. Kazim, however, realized the truth was more sinister. The registry hadn't been updated in over 2 decades because the Administration Bureau had deliberately hidden his existence. Dante and One Arm eventually arrived at Dumpling Village. Dante was initially excited, checking his map and confirming they hadn't accidentally ended up back in Tofu Village. One Arm warned him not to get ahead of himself, noting that the deeper they traveled, the stronger the people would become. The village appeared strangely serene and organized, boasting shops, electricity, and even a functioning economic system. Dante noted that while the map indicated most villages were under soldier control, the specific rulers of this territory weren't listed. He urged One Arm to duck into an alley to remain cautious, but he was too late. One Arm had already wandered over to a food stand. One Arm asked for a dumpling, but when the seller demanded 0.10 grams of fog in exchange, One Arm admitted he had none. The seller immediately punched him into oblivion, screaming that he was a thief. As a crowd gathered to witness the chaos, Dante felt a wave of frantic panic. He watched in horror as a grounded One Arm still had the audacity to demand the dumplings. The seller was insulted that anyone would expect the soul and history of Dumpling Village for free and prepared to escalate the violence. Dante dashed forward, covering One Arm's mouth and apologizing profusely. When the seller asked if Dante was a thief as well, Dante desperately lied, claiming One Arm was his younger brother who suffered from a severe mental illness. The seller wasn't buying it, pointing out their suspicious masks and accusing them of being robbers. He declared that evil was not permitted in their village and called for their execution. Just as the situation turned lethal, A man walked in gracefully and commanded everyone to stop. The crowd immediately recognized him as Elder Mongu Dumpling, the dumpling master. He approached the duo, noting Dante's claim about his sick brother and observing One Arm's injured arm. When the seller tried to reiterate that One Arm was a thief, the master pointed out that the man didn't even have a hand free to steal with, causing the seller to fall silent. He instructed them to follow him to his private space. Once they were settled and eating, the master asked why they wore such vicious masks when they both seemed quite kind. He explained that the village tried to remain as wholesome as possible, which is why the residents were so protective of their trade. Dante thanked him for the food, chugging the savory dumplings, and asking how they managed to find quality ingredients in such a place. The master revealed that they procured leftovers and slop from the main cafeteria, causing Dante to instantly spit out his mouthful. He began shoving the remaining dumplings into One Arm's mouth instead, feeling that eating food waste was a bridge too far. The master noted that Mongu dumplings were the pride of the village, attracting visitors from all over, some for the taste and others for the hospital. Dante and One Arm both perked up at the mention of the medical facility. The dumpling master sighed, pulling back his sleeves to reveal horrific scars on his hands. He warned them to stop right there, declaring that the place was no longer a hospital. In a low, serious tone, he told them that it was now known as the Demon King's Castle. Dante stood paralyzed as the gravity of the term settled in, repeating the phrase to ensure he hadn't misheard. The dumpling master explained that an extremely dangerous entity resided within those walls, claiming that the tragedy of Uruk and the surrounding boundary was the creature's doing. He warned them to stay far away, noting that no one had ever seen the Demon King, and returned to tell the tale. Dante tried to rationalize the threat, asking if it was simply a high-level gang leader, but the master clarified that the entity was on a completely different level, making even an approach to the building impossible. The news left Dante deeply unhappy, leading him to press the old man about the doctor they were seeking. The dumpling master turned away, flatly stating that, as far as he knew, no doctor remained. He urged them to leave as soon as morning arrived, offering them a single night's stay, while reiterating that the structure was no longer a place of healing. Later, Dante paced the room provided for them, his mind racing with questions about whether the Demon King had slaughtered the medical staff. He asked One Arm when he had last seen the doctor, receiving only the vague reply that it was a long time ago. Frustrated by the lack of detail, Dante pushed for specifics about the hospital's former state. One Arm recalled a time when he was hungry, dizzy, and already missing his arm, leading him to seek treatment. He described meeting a man at the facility, a doctor, and asking for help with his limb. Dante interrupted to verify the dialogue, prompting One Arm to recall the doctor's blunt response, asking if One Arm wanted the arm attached right then and there, accompanied by a sharp insult. Dante was dazed by the doctor's lack of bedside manner, but the story took a sharper turn when One Arm admitted he had responded by hitting the man. Naturally, the doctor hit him back, resulting in a back-and-forth brawl. Dante panicked, asking if One Arm had killed the only medical professional in the zone. One Arm clarified that he hadn't killed him. Instead, the doctor had been the one to teach him a lesson, knocking him out cold that day with a final blow. Now One Arm began to stumble toward the door, declaring his intention to go back and hit the man again. Dante screamed in disbelief, questioning who One Arm thought he was going to fight. He reminded him that the village chief had already declared the doctor dead or gone. But the logic only seemed to annoy One Arm. One Arm insisted he had heard the doctor's voice, a claim that felt like a reach given the circumstances. However, the scene shifted to a figure in the distance twirling surgical scissors with practiced ease, confirming that someone was indeed alive inside the facility. The next morning, Dante and One Arm approached the perimeter of the medical center. Dante covered his nose in disgust, noting that the area was a graveyard of skeletons and fresh corpses. It was clear the bread seller hadn't been lying. This was no longer a hospital. He questioned One Arm's certainty, but One Arm doubled down on having heard the voice. Dante realized that One Arm possessed an incredibly sharp sense of hearing, an ability that allowed him to pick up sounds with supernatural clarity. Earlier, Dante tried to probe into this special talent, asking if One Arm had some kind of sensitive hearing. One Arm reacted angrily, denying he had any weird talents. Dante didn't buy the act, arguing that such an ability would be a massive asset to their survival. To test his theory, Dante covered his mouth and made the tiniest murmuring sounds. One Arm instantly kicked him, annoyed by the noise. which confirmed Dante's suspicions. Dante thought it was almost cute how one arm tried to hide it, considering he had heard a sound that was practically non-existent. As they neared the main entrance, Dante pulled one arm into an alley to go over the plan. He asked one arm to repeat the strategy, which involved knocking on the door and hiding immediately. If the person who emerged wasn't the doctor, they were to find a weapon and run. Dante dubbed it Plan, Ring the Bell and Run, realizing that one arm's speed, nearly rivaling Rambutan's, made him the perfect scout. One arm approached the entrance and used his leg to strike the door before dashing back to the hiding spot. They waited in silence, but no one emerged. Dante urged him to try again, telling him to knock even harder. One arm repeated the process, looking almost comedic as he kicked the door and sprinted back to cover. Still, the hospital remained silent. Dante wondered if the building was actually empty, questioning if one arm had truly heard a voice earlier. Suddenly, one arm surged toward the entrance again, but instead of a simple knock, he used his foot to shatter the glass of the hospital entrance. Dante was horrified by the chaotic move, screaming for one arm to get out of there immediately. Instead of running out, one arm was suddenly pushed back by a force from within, tumbling out of the building. Dante braced himself, fearing the arrival of the Demon King, but as footsteps approached the exit, he saw a man twirling scissors. The figure stepped out, looking incredibly cool despite the tension, and muttered about how rude the intruders were. Dante realized with a shock that this wasn't a monster. It was the doctor. The man stood there with his medical scissors, looking out at the world as if he were the most dangerous thing in the zone, while one arm simply looked up and confirmed that the man was indeed a doctor. The doctor tilted his head, eyeing one arm with cold indifference before asking if they had actually come to see him. One arm bluntly told him to fix his arm, prompting the doctor to give them a 3-second warning to get lost. Dante tried to whisper a warning to one arm, urging him to show some manners and act pitiful to gain sympathy, but one arm ignored him and the doctor suddenly grabbed the mask himself, demanding to know if they had brought any fog with them. He mocked the idea of trash criminals like them deserving human treatment, pulling one arm's mask upward to reveal his face. When one arm reiterated that he was a doctor, the man simply asked what his profession had to do with one arm's injuries. The silence that followed was broken when one arm suddenly swung his leg, striking the doctor in the side. Dante watched with his mouth agape as the doctor effortlessly caught the limb, calling one arm an ill-mannered bastard, before shoving him away with enough force to knock Dante over as well. As one arm hit the dirt, the doctor loomed over him, noting with a smirk that dodging his follow-up was not bad for a one-armed man. Infuriated, one arm tumbled across the ground and delivered a sudden kick to the doctor's chest. The doctor managed to cushion the blow with his hand to keep from flying backward. He quickly grabbed one arm and slammed him into the ground, leaving Dante dazed as he watched from the floor. The doctor held one arm's leg, taunting him by asking what a one-legged bastard could possibly do, now that his lower limbs were useless too. In a desperate counter, one arm used his free leg to hook the doctor's neck, twisting his body and using his teeth to bite down on the doctor's hand. The doctor was genuinely surprised as one arm targeted his flexor muscle, forcing him to release the leg. Realizing that one arm understood exactly which muscle to target, the doctor smiled at the interesting turn of events before striking one arm in the neck. The blow caused one arm to exhale sharply, unable to defend himself as the doctor used his surgical scissors to strike multiple points on his body. One arm fell limp, paralyzed in an instant, though he somehow managed to catch himself and tumble backward to face his opponent again. The doctor began reciting anatomical terms: the masseter muscle, the internal oblique, the lumbar, and the peroneus longus, causing one arm to finally collapse in a heap. The doctor laughed, twirling his scissors and mocking them for not leaving when they had the chance. He moved in close, prepared to strike with the blades, until Dante screamed for him to stop. Dante jumped between them, pleading for calm and insisting they hadn't come for a fight. Dante explained he had hidden because he wasn't sure if the place was still a hospital. The doctor told them to just go off and die naturally, clearly harboring a deep hatred for prisoners. Dante, sensing the doctor's prejudice, asked what would happen if he weren't a prisoner. When the doctor dismissed this as nonsense, Dante pulled his eye open to show he had never used fog, claiming to be 100% normal. The doctor was visibly surprised by this realization. Dante explained that he was a teacher in the private prisoner education program and had been stranded by the riots. He begged for help, causing the doctor to facepalm and laugh at the absurdity of a private teacher being stuck there. To prove his point, Dante pointed out his Stefano Ricci tie and custom Italian pants, arguing that no prisoner would possess such high-end luxury brands. The doctor finally relented, asking what they needed. Dante asked him to contact the management office and to treat One Arm's injuries. When the doctor asked if One Arm was also a teacher, Dante looked at his dazed companion and quickly claimed he was a PE teacher. Talk about a career change. The scene shifted to the information broker's office, where the Bone Eater had returned to see Kazim. He remarked that the day he promised had arrived, noting that Kazim had a beach-like scent. Kazim uncomfortably reminded him that they hadn't set a date, but the Bone Eater clarified that he returned whenever he missed the taste of him. To save himself, Kazim revealed that a witness had sighted their target in Tofu Village. The news made the Bone Eater smile, and his crew immediately prepared to move out. One of Kazim's men questioned if giving up high-level intel that the Hound was also seeking was a good idea, but Kazim snapped back, asking if the man would prefer they be eaten instead. He explained that the Bone Eater didn't care about the unwritten rules of big shots or the management. He was driven purely by a hunger that consumed everyone around him. With that, the crew dashed toward Dumpling Village in pursuit of Dante. The scene shifted back to the hospital as Dante looked up at the expansive space, noting that the structure appeared incredibly aged, resembling a rotting, abandoned house. He wondered if such a decayed place could truly be a hospital, or what kind of monstrous facility had been built there. When Dr. Heron entered, he remarked that Dante's wound was not particularly serious and only needed treatment to recover to its previous state. Dante took the opportunity to introduce himself as Dante Kang, but the doctor immediately warned him not to touch his hands to avoid infection. The doctor introduced himself as Hei Relen, or Dr. Heron, causing Dante to offer a polite greeting. Dr. Heron dismissed the formality, suggesting they stick to names, and inquired about the identity of the other man. Dante looked at One Arm and identified him as David. Dr. Heron questioned why a physical education teacher would speak so aggressively, leading Dante to mention the strange rumors about a demon king hiding in the facility. He noted how run down the hospital looked and asked if an incident had occurred. Dr. Heron sighed, explaining that something had happened that left him no choice but to reject requests to contact the administrative office. He revealed that his situation was no different from theirs, as he was also being held captive. This news shocked Dante, who became frantic, asking how someone from the administrative office could be trapped. Dr. Heron explained that he had been assigned there for a mission 4 years prior to practice surgical skills, along with other interns and transferred doctors. Not long after, everyone had died because of a lunatic who lost control, leaving the doctor as the sole survivor. When Dante asked why no one had rescued him, Dr. Heron pointed out that he wouldn't be trapped for 4 years if rescue were an option. Dante mentioned hearing that thick fog made rescue difficult, but Dr. Heron clarified that the fog was an excuse. He noted that the true members of the administrative office moved through the fog in masks as if nothing were wrong, concluding that they hadn't failed to find the hospital but had deliberately abandoned them. These words struck Dante deeply as he sat outside the operating room, realizing that the fog at the entrance had covered everything thickly. He recalled that no one had protective equipment back then, meaning everyone had inhaled the fog. He realized the soldiers used ordinary masks rather than specialized gear, leading him to wonder if even the soldiers had been deceived. He questioned why he had been brought there in the first place, recalling the claim that a competent teacher was needed, someone who could adapt to any situation. His memory drifted back to the International Alliance Crater Administrative Office, where the leader of a special team had come to see him. The man had apologized for the sudden visit, noting that Dante's independent living situation was simpler than he imagined for the son of the famous and wealthy Dr. Edward Kang and Selina Kang. Dante had clarified that he lived independently of his parents' fortune. The man revealed that Dante was their specific target, a man who had walked away from a research career to educate children. The man clapped, calling it an admirable ideal to follow, despite Dante's exceptional genetic code. The man had then dropped a document for the Prisoners' Education Project, explaining that the International Alliance of the Penitentiary System wanted Dante to lead a long-term project. When Dante asked if it was a jail, the man confirmed it, explaining that they needed someone talented because hope and dreams hardly survived in such places. Dante questioned the excessive praise, but the man insisted his qualities were valuable, calling Dante an extraordinary person capable of awakening hope in a living hell. Back in the present, Dr. Heron spoke to One Arm, checking if he could endure the surgery without anesthesia. One Arm claimed he would be fine, prompting the doctor to promise he would treat all the injured areas in one go. Dr. Heron struck a vital point on One Arm's neck before beginning the procedure with intense focus. He moved with fluid, beautiful motions, weaving and connecting torn muscle tissues and sewing the open, bleeding areas. After reconnecting the neck, abdominal, thigh, and calf muscles, the doctor noted that One Arm still hadn't fully passed out or even screamed, which he found impressive. He then turned his attention to the swollen arm, noting that the X-ray equipment was broken and he would have to open it up directly to check the bone. He told One Arm to clench his teeth and endure the pain, slicing the arm and opening it wide with his tools. Dr. Heron observed that the bone was completely shattered, likely from a strong impact after the initial injury. As he began to check the soft tissue by pulling a bone fragment outward, he noticed something strange. The fragments were not just sticking, they were returning automatically to their original positions. He realized with shock that One Arm was regenerating, and he was vexed because he found out that they had deceived him. Outside, the doctor eventually walked out to find Dante. When Dante asked if the surgery was finished, Dr. Heron, strangely carrying one arm on his shoulder, accused Dante of being tired of living. He demanded to know how Dante had the nerve to trick him into treating a prisoner. The doctor walked past Dante, his expression clouded with visible annoyance. Dante scrambled after him, shouting to ask what he was doing, only for the doctor to bluntly state that he intended to throw the injured man away. Dante stood there spiraling, wondering how the doctor could have reached such a conclusion. He questioned if One Arm had somehow spoken, or if the doctor had recognized him from a previous visit. Dante tried to pivot, claiming it was all a massive misunderstanding and doubling down on the physical education teacher lie. Dr. Heron was not having it. He asked how he could possibly be mistaken about a tumor of that size, referring to the unusual nature of One Arm's physiology. Without further ceremony, the doctor tossed One Arm's body aside like a sack of potatoes. Dante screamed at him, arguing that a doctor should never treat a patient with such blatant disregard. Dr. Heron turned on Dante, grabbing him and demanding to know who he really was. When Dante maintained his teacher persona, the doctor questioned why a man of his standing was associating with a prisoner. Dante explained that One Arm had saved him multiple times and was someone to be trusted. The doctor scoffed, asking if Dante had failed to notice how terrifying the region was, or if he had simply lost his mind. Dante reflected on the brutality he had witnessed from others like Rambutan and Lychee, acknowledging the darkness of their world, but he insisted that he had to be selective about his allies since he couldn't survive alone. He suggested the doctor needed help as well, rather than planning to hide in a decaying building forever. Dr. Heron released his grip, admitting that hiding was exactly his plan. He confessed to trusting no one, not guards, not prisoners, and advised Dante to pick a safe path rather than dying in a gutter. He offered to guarantee Dante's safety if he stayed at the hospital, but he drew a hard line at One Arm, refusing to let the prisoner remain. The rejection made Dante uncomfortable, causing his mind to drift to a painful memory of his brother. He recalled reaching for a broken bed on the floor, only for his brother to kick it away and tell him to think logically. Back in the present, Dante found himself dragging One Arm's heavy frame out of the hospital. He muttered to the semi-conscious man, asking why he couldn't have just stayed still during the treatment. One Arm, drooling on Dante's head, insisted he hadn't done anything wrong. Dante snapped that the doctor only got pissed because One Arm was a troublemaker. One Arm repeated his innocence, causing Dante to tell him to shut up just as he lost his footing. They both tumbled down a steep incline, eventually landing on a flat surface. Dante groaned, cursing the architects who decided to build a hospital on a literal slope. Exhausted and frustrated, he told One Arm to throw away the heavy lump of trash bags he was carrying. One Arm huddled over his belongings, refusing to part with them. Dante screamed that he couldn't walk another step and questioned why One Arm refused to cooperate with anything. He lamented giving up a guaranteed safe haven with the doctor, just to end up back on the road like an idiot. In a fit of annoyance, Dante slapped himself, only to be interrupted by a voice calling out to them. It was the dumpling master and his companion. The master asked what the two were still doing there, leading Dante to call out to him as Sir Dumpling. They were brought back to the shop, where the master's companion placed One Arm on the ground. The dumpling master reminded them that he had warned them never to return to that area. Dante explained how dangerous the situation had become, causing the master to inspect One Arm's wounds. To his surprise, the arm was already healing. He asked if Dante had dragged the man off for treatment. causing Dante to realize the swelling had vanished and the limb was neatly wrapped. Dante wondered how the doctor had managed such a feat. The dumpling master asked how they had convinced Dr. Heron to help, as he normally never treated prisoners. Dante realized the master knew the doctor well and questioned why he had called the hospital the Demon King's Castle. Dante argued that the doctor wasn't vicious and had even offered him a place to stay. The master explained that the villagers used the terrifying name simply to keep prisoners from swarming the area. He noted that Fogland was essentially a trash can for useless people, making a medical center an outrageous luxury they couldn't afford to lose. The master's memory drifted back to a time when the hospital was filled with kind doctors and nurses. Despite the savage and wretched nature of the people in Fogland, the medical staff had treated everyone with devotion, seeing the value of life in even the most contemptible inmates. This sincerity had slowly softened the villagers, leading them to bring gifts of hot dumplings to the staff. The dumpling master recalled a younger version of himself bringing food to Heron, who had just finished a surgery. Heron had teased the master about his stubbornness and recurring injuries, causing the man to blush with gratitude. Back then, the villagers felt human again because of the doctors. To repay them, some brought food or scraps, while others, foolishly, brought fog. The accumulation of fog at the hospital became the catalyst for disaster. Greed took hold of those who wanted to seize the fog, leading to a bloody massacre. By the time the villagers arrived the next morning, the doctors were gone. They found the wards empty and realized the very prisoners being treated had likely turned on their saviors. They eventually found Heron in a room, his body covered in blood and his legs torn apart. He was traumatized and barely breathing. The dumpling master had desperately tried to save him, but Heron's mind had shattered. He told them all to get lost, swinging a knife at anyone who approached and calling them devils. Dante asked how he had survived such injuries, and the master revealed it was because he had touched the fog. Though the exact nature of his monstrous new abilities remained a mystery, Heron had survived on his own, only to endure a life of pain worse than death. The scene cut back to the hospital, where Dr. Heron sat alone in the derelict hospital, staring into the distance after a lonely meal. In that fragile moment, Dr. Heron's thoughts drifted back to a time when he and his colleagues gathered to eat. One of them had questioned how he could swallow food made from leftovers thrown away by others, prompting the doctor to defend the meal. He explained that the person providing it had gone to the trouble of selecting only the clean ingredients to cook for them, noting that food was so scarce in that place it was almost deadly. He saw it as an act of a truly noble heart and suggested his peer watch his words so the patients wouldn't feel insulted. However, a younger Heron had been harboring his own frustrations back then. He complained that the released prisoners spoke in a way that was nearly impossible to understand and questioned why they were suddenly bringing so many items to the hospital. The doctors noticed the pile of offerings growing massive and began to speculate about the rumors of a substance that granted extraordinary talents. They wondered if it was the fog they had heard was still in the research phase. One doctor questioned why the administrative bureau wasn't removing it, noting that the prisoners were already becoming addicted and the substance was everywhere outside. A female colleague hushed him, pointing toward a man from the bureau standing outside. She remarked that one didn't need to know too much, as it was a matter for the World Confederation. The man responded cryptically that everything has its reasons for being, a sentiment echoed by the elder doctor who urged everyone to hurry and eat the dumplings before they got cold. The peace was shattered by an emergency alarm, signaling patients in critical condition. The staff instantly shifted into their normal routine, wheeling in a man whose pulse was dropping below 40. They scrambled to increase the dopamine and administer medicine, but they were stopped in their tracks when they realized the patient had no eyeballs. Dr. Welling doubted the man would survive with their ineffective equipment, but the elderly doctor snapped at the nonsense, insisting they keep him alive as long as he was still breathing. Inside the operating room, Heron acted as the assistant surgeon. The situation was a mess. The patient was losing blood rapidly, and the elderly doctor struggled to find the bleeding points amidst the shredded tissue. Suddenly, Heron snatched a tool and pointed out the facial artery, taking over the procedure with surgical precision. By the time they finished, the patient's vital signs had stabilized. Later, as the doctors sat exhausted in the dark, the elderly doctor praised Heron's incredible concentration. He asked how Heron had found the artery so quickly in such a bloody mess, to which Heron simply replied he had seen a flash right before the blood covered everything. The old man told him not to give up on himself, predicting he would one day be a great doctor. But the tragedy followed quickly. The patient they had saved rose from his bed while the elderly doctor slept. Heron watched in horror as the man he had rescued walked through the corridor carrying the old doctor's severed head. The killer looked at Heron and claimed it was Heron who had caught him and locked him back in the prison of a body. As a punishment for being alive, the man reached out and crushed Heron's head in an instant, but somehow he survived. It seemed that Dr. Heron was clearly feeling a lot of shame for surviving. The scene cut back to the present in Dumpling Village, where Dante was dealing with a much more mundane nuisance. One Arm sat on the ground demanding dumplings, completely failing to read the room. Dante asked the dumpling master if it was true. The doctor hadn't left the hospital in 2 years, and wondered what he ate to survive. The master suggested there were plenty of tasty things in the hospital, though Dante remained skeptical that anyone could last that long. Dante suggested they should try to persuade Dr. Heron to help them, citing his old ties to the village. The dumpling master disagreed, stating they were now more like strangers to the doctor than anyone else. He believed the only reason Heron treated them was because they were outsiders. When another villager suggested the doctor might be changing his mind, the master grew stern, claiming that Heron was actually punishing the village, and they should just let him be. Dante reflected on the doctor's desire to hide away forever, finding it a waste of a valuable life. He felt that Heron knew more than anyone and could be a powerful ally. However, he feared the persuasion plan would be ruined by One Arm's lack of gratitude. He scolded One Arm, telling him he should be bowing his head in thanks instead of being a nuisance. One Arm moped in pain, complaining that the doctor had hit him first. When Dante told him to stop bringing up old news, One Arm quietly pointed out that he was still a patient too. That evening, Dante watched One Arm and realized he was seeing an emotion other than anger for the first time. He considered how One Arm, like a rebellious teenager, used irritation to mask deeper feelings he couldn't name: loss, shame, worry, or guilt. Dante realized that most human problems could be solved just by identifying the true name of a feeling. The next morning, the village was busy with talk of collecting fog and finding drinks, but the mundane atmosphere was shattered when a resident was struck from behind. The victim turned to complain, but froze in terror. The Bone Eater and his men had finally arrived in Dumpling Village, causing the residents to glare in silent shock as the threat they feared stood right in their midst. Inside Dumpling Village, the dumpling master declared that he had finally finished a fresh pot of dumplings, intending to check on the boy with glasses and bring him breakfast. His companion questioned if he was providing free food again, causing the dumpling master to explain that he had behaved inappropriately for an adult the day before. He noted that the boy was simply a hungry, homeless child, leading his friend to sigh at the old man's soft heart. Their conversation was abruptly cut short when a villager dashed toward them, screaming that something serious had happened because the Bone Eater had shown up in the village. While the big man beside the dumpling master, Lagos, prepared to lead the defense forces and lure the beast out himself, the dumpling master stopped him. He warned that causing trouble would only lead to negative consequences, suggesting it would be better to invite the Bone Eater in as politely as possible to avoid a bloodbath. It's a bold strategy to offer snacks to a predator, but the old man wasn't about to let the village get wrecked. Meanwhile, Dante woke up in his room, yawning heavily and marveling at how long it had been since he had slept so deeply. His stomach rumbled with a hunger that felt almost deadly, and he realized he desperately needed a bath. He looked over at One Arm, who was sleeping so peacefully that it felt unnatural. Given that the man usually acted like a hyper-vigilant wild beast, Dante grew concerned by the lack of reaction and even placed a hand over One Arm's mouth to check for breath. A heavy exhale from One Arm made Dante's hands sweat, confirming that his companion was indeed human and very much alive. Dante stepped outside to ask Grandpa Dumpling for a shower, but he froze upon seeing the Bone Eater sitting beside the old man, surrounded by a crowd of tense men. Dante recognized the intruder from his previous class and realized one of the big guys had found them. He spiraled into a panic, wondering if the man had followed him there to haunt him. The Bone Eater presented a picture of One Arm to the dumpling master, demanding to know if anyone had seen his face. Dante realized with a jolt that they were looking for One Arm. Before the master could respond, Dante panicked, knowing he had to get One Arm out of there immediately. To his relief, the dumpling master claimed he had never seen the man before. The Bone Eater, claiming to be hungry as hell, listened as his minion insisted that the target was hiding in the village. The minion threatened the villagers, telling them to speak the truth unless they wanted to become a snack for the Bone Eater. The Bone Eater stood up, eyeing the crowd to decide who he should eat first, sending a chill through everyone, including his own men. Grandpa Dumpling quickly intervened, offering the Bone Eater some dumplings. The Bone Eater expressed his distaste for the idea, but the master guaranteed they were of the highest quality. In a high-stakes gamble, the Dumpling Master declared that if the dumplings tasted so bad that even a dog wouldn't eat them, he would offer himself up as a snack. This shocking wager left everyone, especially Lagos, looking pale, but the master maintained his confidence, asking if they didn't trust his famous skills. Dante, watching from a distance, thought the whole village had gone insane, knowing the dumplings were made from scraps and weren't worth dying over. Dante sprinted back to the room, frantically tapping on one arm and cursing his ability to sleep like a corpse at the worst possible time. When One Arm finally opened his eyes, he instinctively tackled Dante to the ground before realizing who it was. Dante, shaken, asked if One Arm had suffered a nightmare, noting that the man's hand was shaking visibly. Though One Arm claimed it was nothing, Dante insisted it wasn't normal, and asked if he could stand. One Arm glared and stood up, grumbling about how annoying the situation was. Dante urged One Arm to escape the village through a window and wait at the entrance, explaining that the people hunting him had arrived. He offered to look after the heavy luggage, but One Arm asked if Dante was abandoning him again. Dante explained that he was trying to save his life, admitting he hadn't realized before that One Arm wasn't a bad person. Feeling he owed One Arm his life, Dante told him to run while he stayed behind to buy time and help Grandpa Dumpling, who was in danger because of them. As the Dumpling Master worked in the kitchen to prepare the meal for the Bone Eater, Dante ran toward the hospital. He realized the master couldn't handle the Bone Eater alone, and felt that Dr. Heron was the only one who could actually do something. Back in the room, One Arm looked at a potato in a cup before untying his bandages. Despite his hand shaking, he managed to grab a machete from his luggage and tie it tightly to his hand. One Arm clearly wasn't planning on a quiet exit. He was gearing up for a fight. No more PE teacher vibes here. The man is officially locked in. The scene shifted back to the information broker's lair, where Kasim and his men sat across from the Hound. The Hound questioned them about the information regarding Subject 182 being sent to the Bone Eater, reminding Kasim that he had been the first to seek their services. He demanded to know if the pay had been worth the betrayal, causing Kasim to show his mangled ears as proof of the struggle he faced just to survive. The Hound dragged Kasim forward, threatening to take an eye or a nose, noting that losing a mere ear was a poor excuse for handing over secrets. Kasim pleaded for calm, claiming he still respected the rules of the underworld, but the Hound tightened his grip. He argued that if the information was stolen, it was because the Bone Eater had no respect for informants, leading to the current mess. Kasim joked that if the Hound continued to mistreat him, he might actually start crying, causing the Hound to strike him across the face and tell him to go cry to his father. Incensed by the slap, Kasim screamed, asking if they were viewed as mere garbage. He claimed he hadn't acted without a plan, calling the Hound an idiot for not understanding the full scope of the situation. Kasim revealed that the Bone Eater's true talent was the ability to collect precise information through taste. When the Bone Eater had tasted Kasim's ear, he had sensed the flavor of a warm beach, identifying Kasim's actual birthplace in Central America. Kasim explained that the Bone Eater could taste the data out of Subject 182 that the Hound was so desperate to find. His assistant praised the brilliance of the plan, but the Hound remained furious, pointing out that the information was useless if the Bone Eater simply ate the subject first. The Hound vowed to crush the man with his own hands, but Kasim assured him he had already sent an infiltration unit of mercenaries from District J to blend in with the Bone Eater's crew. Back in Dumpling Village, a mountain of dumplings sat before the Bone Eater. The Dumpling Master presented them as premium level 10 dumplings, claiming he had used the village's most valuable ingredients and put his heart into the work. The Bone Eater removed his helmet, revealing a smile that sent waves of fear through everyone present. He stretched out his long tongue, snagging a dumpling from the plate while the villagers watched in terror. After tasting it, he declared the food absolute trash. The Dumpling Master was shocked, arguing that one couldn't judge the quality just by a touch of the tongue. The Bone Eater countered by identifying the ingredients: yesterday's crow meat, onions from a supply box, and carrots, claiming it tasted like a bucket of cafeteria leftovers. He threw a dumpling at the master, dismissing it as garbage. The Dumpling Master bent to pick it up, his mind drifting to his own past as a homeless drifter who had stolen food to survive for 10 years. He remembered a cold winter when a woman had chased him down, not to punish him, but to give him hot dumplings. That gift had been the best of his life, and he wanted to share that same warmth with the world. With tears streaming down his face, the dumpling master held a dumpling up to the bone eater, suggesting that if his heart warmed up, his twisted nature might disappear. The bone eater's tongue lashed out toward the master's hand, with the monster admitting he was curious to see what the master himself tasted like. He used his tongue to levitate the old man, declaring his intent to eat the dumpling-shaped head of the master. As the bone eater opened his mouth wide to swallow him, the dumpling master accepted his end, silently apologizing to the doctor. At that moment, Dante arrived at the hospital, frantically screaming for Dr. Heron. He yelled that a psychopath was trying to eat the villagers and that Grandpa Dumpling was in mortal danger. Finding the space empty, Dante began to speak calmly, calling out to the doctor he knew was hiding. He pointed out that the doctor had only survived the last 2 years because of the dumpling master. Dante revealed that every day, even the day he was kicked out, he saw the master leaving bags of dumplings at the hospital to ensure the doctor didn't starve. He called the master the doctor's benefactor and claimed that the real traitor wasn't the villagers, but the doctor himself for hiding away. Dante turned to leave, but Dr. Heron finally appeared, asking what on earth he was talking about. Meanwhile, back in the village, Lagos and the residents launched a desperate assault on the Bone Eater's minions. The Bone Eater held the dumpling master in his mouth, prompting the master to scream for his people to stop because it was too dangerous. Lagos ignored the plea, but the Bone Eater used his massive tongue to strike the villagers down in an instant, scattering them across the space. The Bone Eater's crew mocked the worthless trash for interrupting their boss's meal. The dumpling master begged the Bone Eater to stop, offering his own life if it would spare the village. The Bone Eater ignored the plea, demanding to know where his target was. As the master wept, a voice rang through the clearing, commanding everyone's attention. One Arm walked into the scene, raising a hand that held a dagger and declaring that he was the one they were looking for. Seeing One Arm show up with a knife to a tongue fight is definitely the plot twist the village needed. The scene cut back to Dante as Dr. Heron's voice finally broke the silence. Dante turned toward the doctor, certain that getting under the man's skin was the only way to provoke him into action. Dante asked if the doctor had really been hiding there all along, and if he intended to help. Dr. Heron scoffed, dismissing the idea that the old man with the trash dumplings saved his life. He told Dante to stop with the dramatic performance, asserting that he would have survived on emergency supplies even without those pathetic meals. Dante pressed further, asking if the doctor truly understood the dumpling master's intentions. He warned that if the old man died, the doctor would undoubtedly live to regret it. Dr. Heron's expression darkened as he questioned what Dante could possibly know about regret. He revealed that his greatest regret was using his hands to save a dying prisoner, an act that had directly caused the deaths of dozens of his comrades. He made it clear that he didn't give a damn about the life or death of any trash prisoner. The dumpling master was horrified, calling One Arm an idiot for showing himself. However, the mercenary spy hidden among the Bone Eater's men noted that the target had finally emerged. He recognized One Arm as the hunched demon kid who had famously wiped out the Hound's gang. One Arm issued a cold warning, stating that if anyone touched the dumpling master with even the tip of a blade, he would kill them. The master screamed for One Arm to run, pointing out that the Bone Eater was a big fish who now had him in his sights. The Bone Eater ignored the pleas, grabbing the dumpling master's head and tossing him aside like a toy. He lunged toward One Arm, shouting that the meal was finally served. He lashed out with his massive tongue, frantically licking One Arm's face to analyze him. The spy watched intently, eager to see what the Bone Eater's specialized taste would reveal about the subject. However, as the Bone Eater retracted his tongue, his eyes suddenly glowed with an intense light. Without warning, he collapsed backward, falling completely unconscious. The minions panicked, gathering around their fallen leader and wondering if he was dead. The dumpling master was baffled by the sudden madness, but the spy checked the Bone Eater's pulse and realized he had simply passed out. The spy was annoyed by the Bone Eater's incompetence, feeling that the hollow-brained trash couldn't even handle a simple taste test. He rallied the men, screaming that they had to catch One Arm immediately or risk being eaten themselves. The minions charged, but One Arm moved with terrifying fluidity. He used the dagger tied to his hand to stab his attackers instantly, catching them off guard with his nimble movements. When one man tried to strike him with a chair, One arm used his leg as a cushion shield to absorb the blow. As the chair shattered, he swung his hand in a swift arc, slicing the man's neck before spinning to plunge his dagger into another minion standing nearby. He moved like a blur, tearing through masks and hitting vital points with surgical precision. The dumpling master stared in shock, realizing for the first time that the kid could actually fight. One minion tried to ambush one arm from behind, but one arm caught the blade with his hand, stopping the descent. The man mocked one arm, claiming his weakness was his amputated right side. In a desperate move, the man dropped his weapon to catch it with his other hand. Before the sword could even fall, one arm used his knee to kick the blade and thrust the falling blade straight into the minion's belly, causing the man to fall limp to the ground. One arm stood unscathed among the defeated gang, stating he would kill anyone who tried to act tough. The spy decided he had seen enough. He grabbed the dumpling master, holding a sword across the old man's neck as a hostage. He praised One Arm's knife technique, noting it lived up to the reputation of the man who destroyed the Hound's gang. One Arm dashed forward to attack, causing the spy to leap back and release the master. The spy complained that One Arm wouldn't let people finish talking, clarifying that he was not actually part of the Bone Eater's pathetic gang. The spy revealed he was a mercenary hired to take One Arm with him. When One Arm questioned who sent him, he refused to reveal his employer's identity. He argued that following him was One Arm's only chance to escape the Bone Eater. He pointed out that despite One Arm's strength, he couldn't face the Bone Eater's full power with a rotten arm. One Arm didn't care for the logic, declaring he would just kill the Bone Eater now and end it. He dashed toward the unconscious leader, but the spy intercepted him with a sword, warning him not to even dream of it. The spy pulled down his mask and introduced himself as Multi-Tiger, a mercenary from the District J Armed Assault Unit. He smiled maniacally, asserting that he was far stronger than the Big Fish Bone Eater and that the lives of prisoners meant nothing to him. Back at the hospital, Dante stood before Dr. Heron, realizing the man was colder than he had anticipated. Despite the doctor's harsh exterior, Dante sensed a spark of compassion because the man had agreed to treat One Arm earlier. Dr. Heron snapped at Dante, asking why he liked meddling in other people's business. Dante explained that the villagers had helped them hide and remained loyal until the very end. Dr. Heron laughed, asking if Dante still had not realized that there were no good people among prisoners. He mocked Dante's brain for not learning the reality of their world. Dante fired back, calling the doctor a bastard and stating that normal, good people actually mattered to him. He asked what made the doctor so special that he could reject help and lock himself away out of spite. Dante pointed out that the hospital was not built by the doctor's grandfather and questioned if he intended to stay there and die alone just to prove a point. He told the doctor to stop with the insanity, claiming the doctor did not hide because of his crutch or his injuries. Instead, Dante asserted that the doctor felt a deep, crushing guilt for being the only survivor. He told Dr. Heron that he was simply ashamed to still have the nerve to keep breathing. These words really angered Dr. Heron. The scene returned to the heart of Dumpling Village, where the air grew heavy with the ring of clashing metal. Multi-Tiger managed to intercept One Arm's dagger with his blade, but One Arm refused to relent, forcing his weapon forward in a desperate attempt to strike a vital spot. Multi-Tiger adjusted instantly, using the shield on his other arm to deflect the blow while remarking on the classic irony of the situation, likening their struggle to the legendary paradox of an unstoppable spear meeting an unbreakable shield. One Arm offered no reply, instead dashing forward to launch a rapid-fire series of stabs that forced Multi-Tiger into a defensive rhythm. Multi-Tiger boasted that he didn't have to choose between offense and defense, claiming he could focus entirely on both simultaneously with absolute precision. He swung his blade and shield in tandem, causing One Arm to dodge with a level of agility that seemed to push his physical limits. Realizing he needed more mobility, One Arm used his teeth to rip away the bandages on his hand, allowing his fingers to move more freely despite the immense strain it placed on his healing injuries. Multi-Tiger mocked the effort, swinging his blade relentlessly while asking One Arm which he would choose, the single blade for attack or the shield for safety. The pressure intensified as Multi-Tiger lunged forward with his shield raised, but One Arm ducked beneath the strike. Frustrated, Multi-Tiger shouted for One Arm to take everything at once, launching a combined punch and kick that caught One Arm square in the stomach. The force sent One Arm flying across the clearing until he slammed hard against a wall, causing the gathered villagers to gasp in collective horror. Multi-Tiger stood over him, smugly noting his own versatility, but his expression shifted when he noticed a fresh wound on his own leg. He realized one arm had managed to tag him with the dagger even while being kicked, leading him to admit the kid had some skill. Multi-Tiger toyed with his opponent, throwing the captured dagger back at one arm. Though one arm dodged the flying blade, Multi-Tiger was already moving, striking from behind with a brutal knee that caused one arm's previous stitches to burst. Yet one arm managed to roll away and regain his footing. Multi-Tiger continued his relentless assault of kicks and hand strikes, calling one arm a loser who only knew how to run away. Suddenly, one arm stopped retreating and charged directly at Multi-Tiger, much to the mercenary's surprise. Warning one arm that a planless charge would lead to his death, Multi-Tiger struck downward with a heavy blow that carved a deep gash into one arm's shoulder. However, the mercenary immediately regretted the strength of the swing, fearing he might have accidentally killed his target. His concern shifted to shock when he realized one arm had ignored the shoulder wound to drive his fingers toward Multi-Tiger's ear. Multi-Tiger barely managed to block with his shield before withdrawing, watching as one arm slumped limply to the ground. Multi-Tiger stared at his own bleeding hand, unnerved by the realization that one arm had completely abandoned defense to land a counterattack on a vital point. The Dumpling Master screamed for the boy and rushed toward him, while Lagos launched a brave but futile charge toward the Bone Eater. Multi-Tiger swatted both of them aside, telling them to stay down and stop acting brave. He approached one arm's body, annoyed that the injuries were far deeper than he had intended. He realized then that one arm must have been severely injured before the fight even began, making his performance even more improbable. Multi-Tiger hoisted the unconscious body onto his shoulder, deciding he had secured the target and hoping the boy wouldn't die before he could collect his pay. The victory was interrupted by a low, guttural voice. The Bone Eater rose from the ground, his mouth salivating as he muttered about a familiar taste. The sensation of one arm's blood on his tongue triggered a dormant memory from his time in prison, back when he was small and weak. He remembered a guard tormenting him with a delicious-looking meal, telling him he would have to crawl to the cafeteria if he wanted to eat. The other prisoners had mocked him, calling him a pathetic pup, and noting that the guards had left him locked in a cell for an entire month due to sheer negligence. The memory grew darker as the Bone Eater recalled a man tempting him with a fog ball, mockingly calling it raw rice. Driven by a month of starvation, the Bone Eater had licked the metal bars of his cell until his tongue bled, screaming that he was going to die. When the man reached his hand into the cage to play with him, the Bone Eater had chomped down on the man's hand instead. That was the first time he had ever tasted fog, and the resulting reaction had been the catalyst that transformed him into the hideous, powerful form he now inhabited. The scene cut back to the heavy conversation between Dante and Dr. Heron. Dante realized that digging into someone's old wounds wasn't exactly the peak of persuasion, noting that he was falling into the same toxic habits his brother used to have. He wasn't wrong, though, as Dr. Heron finally cracked, admitting that the deaths of his colleagues were entirely his fault. The doctor confessed that he believed he deserved to suffer for being the one who survived. His memory pulled him back to a moment of pure agony, where he had screamed for help while other doctors watched, unable to intervene. The very prisoner he had rescued, who had since brutalized the medical staff, mocked him by saying that life was merely a cycle of hell. The man had described the hospital as a gallows and a torture chamber, where innocence and guilt were irrelevant. In that flashback, the hospital had descended into total anarchy, with patients attacking doctors in a wave of doom. In the present, Dr. Heron threw his medical tool to the ground and lunged at Dante, grabbing him by the shirt. He shouted that everything that miserable prisoner had said was true. This was hell, and being alive felt no different than being dead. He explained that, after the massacre, his body had fought to survive against his will. He had stayed in the hospital, eating fog like a madman, and eventually using his newly obtained talent to perform surgery on himself. He had rebuilt his entire body, using the flesh and blood of the prisoners he despised, effectively becoming a monster to survive. He glared at Dante, declaring that the good doctor was dead and that he had chosen to rot in the hospital until the end. Dante watched him, thinking that such a path wasn't a choice but a cage. His own mind drifted back to a memory of his brother mocking him for reading about elementary school teaching and child psychology. His brother had called him selfish and warned that their father would explode if he found out Dante wanted a pathetic job as a babysitter instead of something high status. Dante remembered shouting back that his business was his own, and that his brother was a status-obsessed perfectionist. He had vowed never to become garbage like his parents, wanting to choose his own path. However, Dante realized that his own path had eventually become distorted because the teacher who shaped his heart was a monster. He looked at Dr. Heron and told him he was wrong. The doctor hadn't chosen his fate. It was the karma of the prison forced upon him. Dante argued that the doctor was the only person who had built a place where rules and morality still existed. Dr. Heron snapped back, asking why he should care about the village, or why the dumpling master was so obsessed with a shitty dump. Dante countered by pointing out that the doctor was the one who had taught the old man everything. He told the doctor that he was the one who had shown the master that life has value and that people should live with dignity. This struck a chord with Dr. Heron, causing his mind to return to the image of the dumpling master kneeling outside the hospital years ago. The master had sworn on his life to turn the area into a safe village. He remembered the old man sitting outside the hospital doors every day, reporting on new dumpling shops and the arrival of electricity. Even when the doctor refused to come out, the master would leave bags of dumplings, pleading with the doctor not to skip meals and reminding him that the doctor himself had taught him to take care of his body. Dr. Heron realized that the master's words were true. The village was now bright and civilized. Dante asked him who his true teacher was, the monster controlling his life, or the man who built a civilization. This question finally caused the chains around the doctor's heart to shatter, leading him to accept reality and weep for the old man. The scene shifted back to the village, where the Bone Eater had risen again. Multi-Tiger, still carrying One Arm's body, tried to leave, dismissing the Bone Eater's talk as a waste of time. However, the Bone Eater used his tongue to snag Multi-Tiger's leg and slam him to the ground. One Arm's body went flying, and as the Bone Eater's tongue lashed out to grab him, Multi-Tiger intercepted it. He screamed that One Arm was his prey, and that the Bone Eater shouldn't dare touch him. Multi-Tiger tried to slice the tongue with his blade, but it was too hard to cut. The tongue swiped him backward, forcing him to parry a rapid succession of strikes with his shield and blade. Suddenly, the tongue whipped around Multi-Tiger's neck, constricting so tightly that the veins popped in his face. He realized in terror that his attacks weren't leaving a single scratch, and that this wasn't the same Bone Eater he once knew. The Bone Eater tossed Multi-Tiger aside and dashed toward One Arm. The dumpling master quickly positioned himself as a human shield, shouting for Lagos to take the boy and run. The Bone Eater laughed, asking why the master was always trying to take away his food. As the monster swung a punch to finish the old man, One Arm suddenly thrust his own hand into the Bone Eater's mouth. Multi-Tiger screamed, wondering if One Arm had actually gone crazy and decided to let himself be eaten. The dumpling master started to cry, asking why One Arm would do this after they had risked their lives to save him. One Arm simply replied that he had to repay his debt. The Bone Eater bit down hard on One Arm's hand, savoring the taste and calling it a gift from God that saved him from his endless hunger. However, he quickly realized something was wrong. He couldn't chew through the hand. As he struggled to bite down, his jaw suddenly exploded with pain. In a flash, Dr. Heron appeared, driving a sharp pair of medical scissors into the side of the Bone Eater's jaw. The doctor has officially entered the chat, and things are about to get very surgical. The moment Dr. Heron arrived, the atmosphere in the village shifted into pure disbelief because he had not stepped foot outside the hospital in years. Moving with clinical precision, Dr. Heron pulled his medical scissors from the Bone Eater's head and gripped the monster's skull, causing One Arm's hand to finally slip free from the creature's jagged maw. The Bone Eater reached for his own face in a daze, sensing that his jaw had been expertly severed, leading to a moment of genuine panic. Amidst the chaos, One Arm stood dazed until Dr. Heron grabbed his hand, scolding him for ruining the careful treatment he had previously provided. He called the boy annoying and a total idiot, causing the dumpling master to break into tears of relief as he asked why the doctor had finally come out. Dr. Heron surveyed the carnage, remarking that the village hardly seemed safe at all, before lunging forward and burying his scissors deep into the Bone Eater's chest. The Bone Eater roared in agony as the villagers watched in awe, causing the dumpling master to be overcome with emotion at the sight of his old friend finally returning to the light. However, the doctor's blade became wedged so tightly in the monster's dense chest that it refused to budge, leading to the true beginning of the struggle. Multi-Tiger watched the exchange with skepticism, questioning if a man could truly end a fight using nothing but a pair of surgical scissors. The Bone Eater screamed in a fit of rage, demanding to know who the intruder was and what he was doing to his body, to which Dr. Heron replied that the monster should bark all he wanted as long as he spoke properly. The Bone Eater lashed out with his massive tongue, causing the Dumpling Master to scream a warning that the scissors would never be able to cut through such a thick muscle. Dr. Heron dodged the flying appendage with ease, noting that no matter how incredible a body seemed, it was ultimately just a mass of cells. He smiled as the Bone Eater charged, his eyes already pinpointing the exact muscle fibers and nerve endings required to disable the creature. When he found the perfect opening, he put his scissors to work, slicing through the essential points as he passed the monster in a blur of motion, before Dr. Heron slit the tongue at its base, causing it to retract violently into the Bone Eater's throat. The monster realized too late that his muscles had been completely shredded, leading Dr. Heron to explain that the tongue would now roll up and choke him due to the precision of the cuts. The severed muscle began to expand, effectively blocking the Bone Eater's trachea and preventing him from drawing breath. Panic set in as blood began to leak from the monster's nose, and his eyes turned a deep, suffocating red, causing his legs to finally give way. The Bone Eater fell limp to the ground, his body hitting the dirt with a heavy thud that signaled the definitive end of his reign. The villagers erupted in celebration, shouting that the monster had finally been defeated, and hailing Dr. Heron as the Demon King who had saved their home. They danced and hugged in the streets, with one villager even twerking in a fit of pure joy, leaving Multi-Tiger stunned that such a high-level threat had been dispatched so quickly. Dr. Heron ignored the praise, instead kneeling by the Bone Eater's corpse to cut open his stomach, revealing the grim contents of his intestines. He pulled out a human bone, observing with clinical detachment that human flesh was an absurdly poor source of muscle. The Dumpling Master approached and knelt in the dirt, apologizing through his tears for failing to create a safe village or change the nature of the people. He admitted that perhaps the doctor was right and that these people were beyond help, but Dr. Heron told him to stop obsessing over it. He told the old man to stop forcing promises on and to learn to fulfill his own goals first, causing the Dumpling Master to smile through his tears and accept the doctor's harsh but honest guidance. Dante finally emerged from the corner, marveling at how quickly the doctor had ended the threat, noting that the man was far stronger than the big guys of the region. He felt a sense of satisfaction that the doctor had made the right decision, realizing that this victory would give him the leverage needed to negotiate. However, the peace was interrupted by a scream as villagers crowded around One Arm, who had collapsed from extreme blood loss. Dante rushed to One Arm's side, screaming at him for still being there instead of escaping as he had been told. He looked at the boy's messed up state and asked what he had been thinking, calling him a stubborn idiot for trying to fight in such a wrecked body. One Arm looked up at Dante with an innocent expression, explaining that he only wanted to help the old man. He asked Dante if he hadn't been the one to teach him that lesson in the first place, causing Dante to pause in silence. Looking at the boy, Dante realized he was finally beginning to understand him, responding softly that One Arm was completely right and had done very well. In that moment, Dante realized that he was finally beginning to understand the boy. As he glared at One Arm, he noticed strange, floating particles that looked like dandelion spores, causing him to wonder if his eyesight was failing again. He removed his glasses to clear his vision, while in the next room, One Arm finally blinked his eyes open and surveyed his surroundings. He woke to find Dr. Heron sitting beside him, quietly sewing together the boy's tattered clothes. When One Arm saw the fabric, he weakly claimed them as his own, leading the doctor to acknowledge that he was finally awake. Dr. Heron looked at him with a scrutinizing gaze, asking how old he actually was. He explained that from a biological standpoint, most people with such abnormally strong abilities had been trapped in the prison for over 20 years. Yet One Arm's origins seemed remarkably fresh, suggesting he was still just a child. One Arm insisted he was an adult, though he admitted he had been a child once, causing Dr. Heron to scoff at the nonsense. The doctor pointed out that he, too, had once been a child, to which One Arm concluded that they were essentially the same. Dr. Heron was visibly annoyed, asking if the boy was an idiot for equating their ages. One Arm shot back, questioning what a mere doctor could possibly know since he wasn't a teacher. This insult hit a nerve, leading Dr. Heron to argue that his intellect likely surpassed any teacher One Arm had ever known. One Arm simply told him to stop lying. He asked if One Arm had been born in this chicken coop with no exit, noting it wouldn't be strange, given it was established 45 years ago. One Arm clarified that he had been there from the beginning, which the doctor took as confirmation of his theory. Tossing the mended clothes directly into One Arm's face, Dr. Heron stood up to leave, noting that the boy's recovery speed was impressive enough that he would be fine soon. He instructed One Arm to stay put and only alert him if he managed to pass gas, flatly stating that they no longer owed each other anything. Later that evening, the scene shifted to a quiet corner of the hospital where Dr. Heron stood by as Dante examined a map. Dante explained that a traditional exit was impossible because of a massive monster-sized device that slaughtered anyone attempting to flee. Dr. Heron was skeptical about the existence of such a monster, but Dante insisted he had seen the horror with his own eyes. He pointed to the map, declaring his intention to reach the central headquarters to meet the administrative bureau. Dr. Heron warned that the bureau wouldn't take a prisoner's side, but Dante remained defiant, stating that whether he ended up setting fires or just failing miserably, he had to try. He argued that the bureau were the only ones who knew the way out. When the doctor questioned how Dante would handle a body already poisoned by fog, a bead of sweat rolled down Dante's cheek. He theorized that leaving the source would allow him to quit, comparing fog to a drug that is only addictive because it is easy to find. He hoped his father, a scientist, could gather experts to research a cure once the truth caused a massive public uproar. And so Dante urged Mr. Heron not to be worried, but Heron stopped him. He told Dante to look in the mirror. Dante stepped into the toilet and let out a blood-curdling scream upon seeing that one of his eyes had turned a piercing blue. Dr. Heron noted that this transformation was an inevitable part of living there, but Dante panicked, realizing the moment Rambutan had warned him about had arrived. He was terrified that he would now crave fog and fall into a limbo state despite never intentionally consuming it. He felt like the world was being deeply unfair, screaming about how he was truly screwed since he lacked any special abilities to compensate for the mutation. Dr. Heron questioned the outburst, reminding Dante that he had claimed recovery was possible. Dante despaired, stating that an addict's life only led to destruction. The doctor called him a brat, but confirmed that continuous limbo states eventually led to a total loss of cognitive ability and a coma. He warned that falling into limbo in the outside world, where there is no fog to sustain the mutation, would be even worse than becoming a vegetable. Despite the grim outlook, he asked if Dante still intended to go. The heavy silence was broken by one arm, who wandered in complaining of hunger. Dr. Heron glared at him, ordering him back to bed and insisting he fast, until he finally farted to prove his digestive system was healing. One arm asked why, leading the doctor to tell him to stop talking nonsense. Dante eventually interrupted the bickering, confirming that he was definitely leaving, because a life of regret in the prison was no life at all. The trio packed their bags and prepared to depart. The dumpling master stood with them, praising their choice to return to where they belonged. Lagos tried to convince them to stay through the winter, but the master insisted they shouldn't be stopped. Dante shook the dumpling master's hand, thanking him, while the old man expressed his gratitude for a stranger from the outside coming to their aid. Dante promised to take the doctor home safely, prompting the master to hand over a massive bag of top-grade soft dumplings so they wouldn't go hungry. Dante complained that it was too much to carry, but one arm instantly grabbed the bag, ignoring Dante's warnings that his stitches might reopen. They shared a final wave and a series of quick goodbyes. Before walking out, Dr. Heron stopped and asked to see the dumpling master's hand. He examined the old surgical scars, admitting that his skills had been terrible back then, and promising to treat the hand properly if they ever met again. With that final exchange, they left the village behind. Elsewhere, the woman with the brown bag over her head sat in silence, musing over the interesting combination of a doctor and a teacher. Her phone began to ring incessantly, causing her some annoyance before she finally picked up. She told the caller that the one-armed guy wasn't as strong as rumored, but hadn't died because he had apparently made a friend. The person on the other end laughed at the idea, wondering how someone like One Arm could possibly have a friend. The caller, revealed to be the red-headed man from earlier, stood before a massive building with a thick, ominous cloud of fog billowing from its exit. He walked toward the structure, his mind focused on a single, final question: how much fog was left? In a massive, dimly lit room, the red-haired leader of the admin team sat gathered with his board members to address the dwindling resources of Fogland, explaining that the usable amount of fog was depleting rapidly, leaving them with only 5 years of supply. This revelation caused a ripple of unease, leading one man to question if it was already too late, or if there was any way to finalize their objectives within such a tight window. This guy, the red-haired commander, reasoned that for their plans to succeed, they required more outstanding talent, when another member argued that using ordinary people as targets was no longer realistic due to the difficulty of suppressing public opinion. The commander simply remarked that winter was coming. With a sharp clip of his fingers, Red Hair asked if the supply boxes were ready, requesting for a report. One of the subordinates began a meticulous list, noting that they planned to deploy 500 boxes containing daily necessities, bedding, food, and various crop seeds. He detailed the inclusion of construction materials and tools, like saws and hammers. For protection, 10 Glock 19 pistols were added to the inventory. The red-haired leader considered the list and suggested they add gunpowder to the supply. He understood that they should not simply give people fish, but rather teach them how to catch them. This guy's cold logic made the men around him visibly uncomfortable, but the reporter quickly agreed to make the adjustments. The commander acknowledged the urgency, but remained steadfast. Recalling his father's words that the right moment would surely come, he concluded that they must create a bigger storm to reach their goals. Elsewhere, in the quiet, grimy corners of the facility, a blonde woman sat on the cold floor with a bowl of carrot soup placed before her. She was disheveled and weak. As she stared at the soup, her mind drifted into a daze, calculating the starch and mitochondrial flora passing through the citric acid cycle. Realizing that the food would likely only provide the illusion that she was still alive, her smile was weary and lacked any true light. Her thoughts were interrupted when a young girl with white hair and striking white-blue eyes appeared beside her. The woman was baffled, her eyes widening in abject shock at the sight of a child in such a place. The lady hugged the young girl tightly. The child, Bren, stood looking confused by the sudden embrace, eventually resting her hand on the lady's hair and stating that she was not an angel. The lady retracted quickly, her mind feeling somewhat clearer as she demanded to know who the girl was. Bren introduced herself, explaining that she was there to clean. She urged the teacher to eat, noting that without a balanced diet, one wouldn't grow well. The blonde woman realized with a pang of guilt that Bren was still just a child, and she asked where the girl's parents were. Before Bren could find the words to respond, a figure emerged from the shadows and struck the girl on the head. An unknown bald woman berated Bren for slacking off. The teacher's annoyance flared, and she pulled Bren toward her, but the bald woman held on tight. The teacher asked how anyone could treat a child this way, but the bald woman laughed, telling the teacher to mind her own business, while Gary was still treating her well. She warned that getting involved with Bren would bring nothing but trouble. The teacher's grip loosened as she felt a sense of helplessness, watching as the bald woman escorted the young girl away. Bren waved a small hand in farewell, leaving the teacher standing alone and utterly bewildered. Meanwhile, in a different space, the sound of stitches being snipped echoed in a quiet room. Dr. Heron was working on one arm, who had recently left the dumpling village. One arm looked significantly healthier, and the doctor noted that there wasn't a single scar left on the injury. He explained that he had repaired the damage at a cellular level, which was why the recovery looked so flawless. Dante, watching the process, asked if this was an ability gained through the fog. Dr. Heron decided to demonstrate, explaining that his ability was called focus. As he locked his gaze onto one arm, the boy shifted uncomfortably. The doctor explained that when he focused, he could see through everything in detail, much like a microscope. This allowed him to detect flaws in the body and enhance strength, a vital skill for survival in a place where people relied on brute force. This kind of ability is very helpful for survival, but he overdid it, and one arm began to beg Dante to stop the doctor. Dante realized that this was an incredible skill. Dante remarked that it was practically a superpower, essentially X-ray vision. Dr. Heron remained humble, mentioning the side effect of severe eye dryness. Dante admitted that if he were to have an ability, he would want something just as impressive. The doctor asked if he intended to take the fog, but Dante clarified that he was already poisoned and was merely wondering, what if? He recalled Rambutan's warning that gaining an ability required a massive amount of fog, and he had no desire to become a monster that craved the substance. Still, he felt a quiet sadness, wishing he had the strength to move forward as bravely as others. Dr. Heron reasoned that fog was not a random blessing, but something that amplified a person's original talents. He believed that what a person developed could be predicted if they had a particular specialty. Dante realized with a bit of frustration that he didn't feel he had any specialty at all. When the doctor told him not to be modest, Dante insisted he was serious about being useless, wondering if he was truly destined to be a cursed, powerless human even in this world. One arm then tried to lighten the mood by mentioning that Dante was really good at yelling, which only earned him a sharp look from a pissed-off Dante. Dr. Heron then noted that talent could be subtle, pointing out one arm's bizarre recovery speed. He explained that the boy's ability to heal wasn't just his power, but a natural trait of his body that far exceeded human limits. Dante was surprised, noting that he understood one arm's primary ability to be hearing. He further pointed out that one arm was incredibly fast and strong enough to shatter a shoulder in one blow. Dante reasoned that in a world where some were useless, others possessed multiple talents at once. He concluded that perhaps he just hadn't learned enough yet. Suddenly, a realization struck Dante's mind. He looked at one arm and asked him to repeat what he had said about the high-rank leader. Our boy realized that the key to opening the tightly shut gates of Fogland might be sitting right in front of him. He questioned the doctor, reminding him that he had mentioned it before. If one became a high-ranking leader, they could finally leave this place. Dr. Heron looked baffled as he asked exactly what was meant by a high-ranking leader. Dante explained that it was a legend told within the borders of Fogland, a tale of someone with infinite talents who would become the god of liberation and free everyone trapped within the mist. The doctor scoffed at the idea, sensing only a crazy myth, but Dante reasoned that there was no smoke without fire. He turned his attention to one arm, asking what he thought of the legend. One arm merely glared at him. He mentioned that those crazy people kept talking, and he didn't understand anything they were saying. This response left Dante feeling frustrated. He grabbed onto one arm and shouted, demanding to know if he actually knew something. One arm's eyes grew cold as he glared back, sensing that something was fundamentally wrong. Dante paused as he asked what that meant. One arm asked why the master, referring to Dante, wanted to become a high-ranking leader so badly. Dante was sure of his answer. He wanted that title because it seemed like the only key to getting out of Fogland. However, one arm remained firm, stating that he had already told Dante he couldn't do it. Dante looked at the boy's obvious gifts, wondering if there was any chance for him given his immense talent. In response, one arm slowly lifted his amputated limb, his expression unreadable, as he stated that he was limited because he didn't have an arm. Dante felt a surge of annoyance, deducing that the boy was dodging the point on purpose. He told one arm that he was driving him crazy by always talking about something else when things got serious. He expressed his frustration, feeling that they should be close enough by now after everything they had endured together. Dante pleaded with him, wanting him to understand his position and how much he longed to escape this hell. One arm simply replied that he did not understand. Dante screamed at him, asking if he ever truly intended to help him escape, or if he was just following him around for fun. Dr. Heron tried to intervene, telling Dante to calm down and noting that the boy wasn't doing anything wrong. But Dante's anger had boiled over. He shouted that one arm had never seriously answered a single question. He demanded to know what crime the boy had committed, why he covered his head with a paper bag, and what was hidden in his luggage. He realized that he didn't even know the boy's name. As Dante pressed him, one arm grew visibly uncomfortable, his eyes turning a faint, pained red. For a fleeting second, Dante fathomed a strange sight. A childlike figure of one arm seemed to manifest before him. Suddenly, one arm stood up and bolted, running away from the camp to escape the pressure of the questions. Dante watched him disappear into the gloom, feeling as though he was truly losing his mind. Dr. Heron, watching the retreat, noted calmly that the boy had left without taking his bag. Later that evening, the crackle of a campfire provided a soft, warm glow against the growing dark. Dante and Dr. Heron sat together, though one arm had not yet returned. Dante noted his absence, remarking that the boy had essentially been a factor of instability. He spoke with a lingering bitterness, characterizing one arm as violent, problematic, and perhaps too stupid to understand their plans anyway. He reasoned that since the boy was a criminal, there was no way he could live with them in the world outside. Dante began to rummage through the luggage one arm had left behind, driven by a desperate curiosity. He felt that the bundle the boy always hid might contain something that could help them. Dr. Heron watched him, asking if he was becoming a thief by digging through someone else's things. Dante felt a flash of discomfort, stammering that the bag had no owner now, but the doctor disagreed. He mentioned that they needed to go together because one arm was not a criminal. Dante glared at him, his mind feeling the static of bewilderment as he asked why the doctor would say such a thing. Dr. Heron explained that he had once treated a very young patient, a baby of this land. He asked Dante if he had ever heard of them. The doctor recounted a time from his past when a man had approached him in the hospital, whispering and begging for a home consultation. The doctor had managed to slip past the security guards and arrived at the man's cell. Inside, he was shocked to see a small child lying on the ground. When the doctor screamed that he would report it to the management office to get help, the man had stopped him, terrified. The man had explained that reporting it would only lead to something terrible. He begged the doctor to act as if he had never seen them, stating that the management would never help those born and raised in the fog. Dr. Heron looked into the flames, confirming that those children are known as the babies of Fogland. Dante was struck by the chilling realization that one arm was likely one of them. He was not a prisoner, but someone who had been born here and had never known any other life. Dante realized that among all the immoralities of Fogland, raising a child in this mist was the most haunting. Dr. Heron admitted he eventually had no choice but to report it, and the family had left the village in a hurry. He suggested to Dante that perhaps the person who needed help the most was actually that boy. In a different part of the fog, One Arm sat alone. He spoke to himself in a low, mourning voice about sweet potatoes he couldn't grow. He looked up into the mist as if speaking to someone he missed, saying he had wanted to show it to them. Standing before him was one of the massive gargoyles, looming over him like a motherly figure. One Arm looked at the giant and whispered that he still couldn't understand. A fragmented memory surfaced, a strange space in a desert where a figure walked through the heat. Helicopters hovered above. The figure in the desert, looking remarkably like One Arm, stumbled as his legs gave way, his breath coming in heavy, exhausted heaves. In the memory, the red-haired leader and his crew stood over the boy in his weakened state. The scene shifted back to the present, where One Arm stared at the gargoyle, begging for it to come back soon and show him the way to stop the storm. He remained on the ground, crying heavily, trapped in the memory of his past and the cold presence of the redhead's crew. One Arm was truly alone in the storm. Inside the massive facility known as Queenstown, a deceptive sense of calm hung over the expansive space. This stillness was abruptly broken by the sound of a heavy sneeze echoing through the halls. Gary, a woman of imposing physical presence with a thick, powerful neck, sat amongst her followers. "Winter is coming," she said to the room. Surrounding her were several female prisoners of Fogland, their gazes fixed on their leader. Gary looked at the group and asked if they were all truly ready to fight. One of the women, Lulon, spoke up. She mentioned that they had been hoarding for 5 years and had consistently given the supply box to the Kundalini team. She asked if there would be a problem this time. Gary's reaction was immediate. She asked if Lulon was suggesting they simply surrender to the Kundalini, and she berated the group, questioning how they could be such cowards when they needed to win at all costs. Lulon tried to clarify that she was concerned for the sisters who were constantly getting injured, but another woman quickly silenced her. She warned Lulon to stop talking, asking if she truly wanted to end up like North. Gary's demeanor shifted as a mischievous smile crossed her face. She told them all to shut their mouths, explaining that this particular supply box was of great importance because it was intended as a gift for her little cutie. Beside her sat the blonde teacher. Gary announced that the gift was for her poor, sick little one who had been feeling depressed. The scene shifted to another area within the prison, dominated by the sound of Gary's boisterous laughter. She loudly announced the gift in front of everyone, patting the teacher's back heavily while she blushed. Gary asked if the teacher had seen the envious looks on the others' faces and questioned if the gesture made her feel a little better. The teacher glared at her, her mind struggling with the absurdity of the situation. She felt that she was no longer a child and reasoned that material gifts were meaningless in such a place. She remarked to Gary that the reactions of the others didn't look like envy at all. Instead, everyone seemed uneasy and frightened. The teacher then asked what exactly these supply boxes were. Gary dismissed them as nothing special, explaining they were simply items dropped by the administration office every quarter, much like a random surprise box. The teacher fathomed that they were just basic supplies, and wondered why anyone would feel the need to fight over such things. She told Gary that she didn't need any gifts and saw no reason for the gesture. Gary insisted, however, claiming that there were excellent things inside the boxes and told her not to worry. Changing the subject, the teacher mentioned she had a question. Gary encouraged her to ask, and the teacher brought up a girl named Brun. At the mention of the name, Gary's expression turned instantly hostile, and another woman in the corner appeared visibly uncomfortable. Gary asked why the teacher was so curious about Brun. The teacher explained that she felt a girl that small simply shouldn't be in a place like this. Gary smiled coldly, noting that since she was a teacher, she must have an affinity for children. Gary stated that she personally found children to be a nuisance. Gary turned and walked away, declaring that she didn't care what the teacher did. The teacher tried to call out to her, wanting to ask more, but the bald woman from before grabbed her by the shoulder. She called the teacher a crazy woman and told her to stop bothering Gary with so many questions. The teacher was left confused as the bald woman warned her to stay out of the matter, stating that everything was because of Brun. Later, the teacher and the bald woman sat together outside to talk. The bald woman revealed that Brun had actually been born here. This revelation caused the teacher to experience a wave of brain fog. The bald woman exhaled a cloud of smoke and told her not to be so surprised, explaining that such things happened often with those who escaped from the women's zone. When the teacher asked why they didn't report it to the administration office, the woman explained that the office didn't even exist. There was no way to contact them, and they never intervened, stating that innocent people who had committed no crime were a minority in this place. She told the teacher that there was no way to return to an old life, and that the only option was to adapt. She warned her never to mention the administration office again, especially not in front of Gary. In this hell, no one was allowed to show how desperately they wanted to escape. She then revealed a heavy truth. Brun's mother had been an innocent person just like the teacher, and she had died at Gary's hands. Much later in the day, Dante and Dr. Heron were resting. Dante was deep in thought. He reasoned that One-Arm's parents must have been prisoners, and that the boy had likely been intoxicated by the fog since his birth. He pointed out to the doctor that it wasn't that the boy was hiding an identity, but that he simply didn't have one. Not even a name. Dr. Heron appeared surprised, and asked if his name wasn't David. Dante rose up, and snapped that he had made that name up on the spot. Dr. Heron was surprised, admitting he had believed it was real. As Dante stood up to walk away, he noted that even the doctor had his clumsy moments. Dante headed toward a different area, thinking to himself that they weren't the only innocent people trapped here. He realized that something completely absurd was happening in FOGLAND, yet no one was raising a voice for their dignity or rights. He wondered if absolute cruelty had domesticated the residents. He questioned what kind of purpose such a hellish place could serve. Suddenly, a voice from the moon spoke to him. As he looked up, the moon seemed to morph into the shape of his brother's head, questioning why he was getting so involved. It told him he was not a messenger of justice or a revolutionary, and insisted the most important thing was getting out safely. It urged him to use logic and not worry about others. Dante glared at the moon with a stern expression and told it to shut up. As the moon returned to its normal shape, Dante thought to himself that if he had learned one thing here, it was that his decisions were not always wrong. He walked back to meet Dr. Heron and began rummaging through One-Arm's bags. The doctor asked what he was doing, and Dante explained that they had to find One-Arm and that he needed to come with them. Our boy was sure that after hearing the boy's story, he couldn't leave him alone in this hell. He calmly thanked Dr. Heron for not rejecting the boy. The doctor scratched his head, noting that as long as one was human, it seemed like the obvious thing to do. Dante observed that while escaping alone might have been the best option for survival, he simply couldn't do it. He told the doctor that he was a slow learner, but he believed he was choosing correctly. He recognized that the person he wanted to save was a good person. Dr. Heron stood up and asked how they would find him, to which Dante replied that he had excellent bait hidden in the bundle. Dante opened the bag, and as the doctor wondered if they'd find a diary, Dante saw the contents and was baffled. The bag was filled with what looked like trash, empty bottles, string, and scrap iron. Dr. Heron called it a pile of garbage, and Dante felt a surge of discomfort. He wondered why the boy kept these things, as if they were treasures. Suddenly, the doctor reached in and pulled out a sweet potato. Excited, he prepared to toss it into the campfire to roast it. Dante screamed and dashed forward with incredible speed, grabbing the potato before it could be burned. He tumbled to the ground, leaving Dr. Heron bewildered. The doctor asked if he was crazy, but Dante was happy the bait was safe. He blew on the potato and saw it was still fresh. He looked hopeful, noticing it had already sprouted roots. He recognized that One-Arm had been taking care of it, and even in this decaying environment, it was growing slowly. The next morning, the sound of birds chirping filled the air. One-Arm lay huddled on the ground, appearing pitiful. He was startled by the voices of two men standing over him. They stood by an X marked on the ground and asked how he dared sleep in their territory. One-Arm woke up and insisted he wasn't sleeping, but the men shouted that they had heard him snoring. They looked angry and were armed with weapons. They told him to get out, noting the space was huge and he was bothering them. One arm looked down and understood they were right about the mark. One of the men began to scream that this was where they received their supplies, but the other man quickly grabbed his mouth to silence him. He berated his companion for speaking so loudly about a secret place that even the zone leaders didn't know about. The two men appeared quite unintelligent, and One Arm glared at them as they realized they had to get rid of him now that he knew their secret. One Arm pointed to himself, sensing the danger as they debated his fate. Instantly, he rose to his feet with a sudden, fluid power. His movement was enough to send a ripple of visible fear through the men standing over him. He glared at them with a vicious, raw anger that made them murmur in hesitation. They noted with surprise that he was far larger than they had initially realized. One of them tried to bolster their courage, reminding his companion that they were the ones holding the weapons. The men pulled out their guns. One of them identified himself as a member of the Technologia crew, claiming to be a master of crafting homemade firearms and the next leader in line for the crew. Beside him, a man named Wilson smiled, introducing himself as the crew's assassin and boasting of his perfect pitch. However, as One Arm began to step forward with a heavy, deliberate pace, their resolve shattered. They screamed at him to stop, demanding he put his hands up while frantically urging each other to shoot. He began to fire, but the shots went wide, missing One Arm entirely as the boy closed the distance. Wilson berated his partner for the poor aim, but the man admitted that shooting a real person was harder than he had imagined. Before Wilson could even pull his own trigger, One Arm moved with blinding efficiency. He disarmed the assassin and pressed the muzzle of the gun directly against Wilson's head. Wilson froze, his life flashing before his eyes as he looked into One Arm's cold, unforgiving gaze. He recognized the immediate lethality in the boy's eyes. This guy was actually going to pull the trigger. Seeing his comrade at death's door, the other man fell to his knees, begging for mercy. He promised to roll over or even bark like a dog if it meant sparing their lives. He actually began to bark, a pitiful sound that filled the tense silence. One Arm looked at the man's desperate state and told him to shut up, his voice hard and dismissive. Some time passed, and the aftermath was clear. One Arm sat calmly while Wilson and his partner knelt on the ground, thoroughly pummeled and looking pitiful. One Arm then demanded for them to explain to him what a supply box is. Wilson, now humbled, remarked that One Arm was incredibly strong for someone who didn't even know what a supply box was. They explained that the boxes were like gifts from the administration office, filled with useful items and materials they used to craft their weapons. Wilson noted that these boxes were the source of their power in the area, but they were rare. Only a few dropped per village, and the bosses usually claimed them all. He pointed out that the spot where One Arm was currently sitting was a secret drop point that even the zone leaders hadn't discovered yet. Since they had shared such a valuable secret, Wilson invited One Arm to join the Technologia crew. One Arm glared at them, his mind focused on a singular purpose. He asked if there were sweet potatoes in the box. When the men looked confused, he clarified, asking if sweet potatoes were found in the supply boxes. The men smiled, explaining that while the boxes contained various things, they often included seeds for crops you could grow yourself. Hearing this, One Arm's interest was instantly piqued. When they told him he could grow thousands of sweet potatoes from those seeds, a sense of childish happiness glowed in his eyes. Meanwhile, Dante was staring at the small sweet potato that One Arm cherished so much. Dante called out into the open air. He shouted that the child had taken its first steps and asked if One Arm was really going to be a parent who never looked at his offspring. He apologized loudly, admitting he had pushed the boy too hard and promising not to do it again. Dr. Heron watched this display, baffled by Dante's method of communication. Dante explained that One Arm possessed extremely sharp hearing, capable of picking up sounds from hundreds of meters away. If he was nearby, he would surely hear the apology. To test the theory, Dr. Heron pulled a blade from his pocket. He threatened to kill the sweet potato if the boy didn't show up immediately. They waited in the silence, but there was no response. The doctor felt a bit stupid standing there threatening a vegetable, and deduced that perhaps the boy didn't like sweet potatoes as much as they thought. Dante insisted that wasn't the case. The doctor concluded that if he wasn't coming, he must have gone far away. As they wondered if he might be at the cafeteria, Dr. Heron noticed something in the sky. They looked up to see 3 helicopters fighting through the heavy mist of Fogland, their rotors churning the air furiously. Dante was shocked, recognizing them as vehicles from the headquarters. He began to run after them, screaming for help and calling out SOS. Dr. Heron called him a fool, noting that the pilots weren't likely to look at them, but he agreed they should chase the helicopters to see where they were heading. As they ran, Dante noticed that other prisoners were also following the helicopters. He was confused, wondering why everyone else was chasing them as well. The scene shifted back to the secret drop point, where the Technologia crew waited. One arm was filled with excitement as the helicopters arrived. Wilson and his partner signaled for the drop, and as the box was released, a parachute opened, allowing it to descend slowly toward the ground. Wilson smiled, sure that the supplies would keep them warm through the winter. Suddenly, the sky was filled with a flock of crows. The birds swarmed the descending box, and to the bewilderment of One Arm and his new companions, the crows began to push the supply box in a different direction. One Arm grew annoyed, recognizing that the birds were essentially stealing their supplies. They immediately began to give chase, following the box through the fog. The supply box eventually landed in a different area, where a crow perched triumphantly on top of it. A crowd of prisoners had already gathered around the fallen crate. Dante and Dr. Heron arrived at the scene, breathless. Dante wondered what was inside, and the doctor noted that since it was from the administration, it likely contained gear or fog-related items. The crowd began to murmur about who would claim the prize. Normally it would belong to the tower, but since he was gone, the hierarchy was unclear. Some suggested splitting the contents, but others laughed at the idea of sharing with so many people. The tension rose as they realized it might simply go to whoever grabbed it first. Suddenly, a man with chubby, baby-like cheeks stepped forward and told everyone to stop. He declared that even without the bosses, the rules remained the same. The strongest would take the box. He walked past the crowd, challenging anyone to face him. Despite his face, this guy was incredibly buff, surprising those around him. Another massive, muscular prisoner stepped out from the clearing, eager to use his fists again. 4 powerful men gathered around the box, agreeing that there would be only one winner and the others would have no grounds for complaint. At the edge of the clearing, Dr. Heron wondered what could possibly be so valuable inside. Dante grabbed the doctor's shoulder and told him that they should take the box as well. Dr. Heron looked flustered, asking if Dante really wanted him to step into that fray. Dante insisted they needed to see what the administration had left behind. When the doctor pointed out the sheer number of spectators, Dante asked if he was an introvert. Annoyed but accepting the task, Dr. Heron exhaled and tried to calm his nerves. He stepped into the clearing, holding his surgical scissors with a pissed-off expression. He told the gathered fighters to get lost unless they wanted to die, his voice steady as he walked into the fray. When Dr. Heron made his declaration, the eyes of every prisoner in the clearing snapped toward him. They began to murmur, bewildered by his outfit, questioning why a man in a doctor's coat was standing in the middle of a battlefield and wondering where he could have possibly obtained such a garment. Dante, however, looked at him with a face full of joy and renewed motivation, cheering him on with repeated cries of encouragement. One of the 4 massive men gathered around the supply box scoffed at the sight. He looked at the doctor and remarked that the skinny, pretty boy was in a completely different weight class, questioning what he was even doing there. His companion laughed along, noting that the newcomer was acting remarkably manly for someone so small. The baby-faced buff guy turned to Dr. Heron with a threatening tone. He pointed out that since there were now 5 of them, the numbers were uneven. He offered to send the doctor straight to the finals with a bye, a clear threat of immediate violence. Dr. Heron remained unshaken. He looked at the group and told them that numbers didn't matter, daring all of them to come at him at once. The baby-faced man was shocked by the audacity and declared that he would take care of the doctor first, just to even the numbers. Instantly, the man lunged, throwing a heavy punch aimed straight for the doctor. Dr. Heron's gaze intensified. His eyes seemed to sharpen with a clinical precision, as if he could see through the man's very skin. He observed the nerves and the blood flow of his opponent, deducing that the fog visible in the man's bloodstream was minimal. He reasoned that the man had no real talent, only sluggishness without true strength. With a fluid, weighted movement, Dr. Heron stepped to the side. The buff guy's punch met only air, his momentum causing his balloon-like muscles to destabilize him. As the man began to fall, Dr. Heron followed up with a massive, calculated punch straight to the man's cheek. The impact was heavy, sending a spray of blood from the man's mouth. The baby-faced fighter was pummeled into the dirt, screeching across the ground as he slid from the force of the strike. He began to cry, leaving the spectators screaming in shock at the sudden turn of events. The remaining men looked uncomfortable. One tried to dismiss the fallen fighter as a weakling, while the other insisted weight classes weren't a big deal. However, the largest man among them grew angry. He expanded his chest and declared he would show the doctor a real weight difference. He seemed to grow wider by 100 kilograms as he charged toward Dr. Heron. Dr. Heron watched the charge with an analytical eye. He noticed that this guy suffered from degenerative arthritis. Just as the man reached him, the doctor struck him precisely on the leg. The joint dislocated instantly, causing the massive man to tumble and crash to the ground effortlessly. Dr. Heron casually remarked that the man really needed to lose some weight, as that was a bit too much pressure on his joints. The remaining two fighters were taken aback, wondering what was happening to their comrades. Dr. Heron laughed and told them they were wasting his time, urging them again to come at him at once as he dashed toward them. They screamed for their lives. When the dust finally settled much later, the four men lay pummeled on the ground. The spectators were in awe, realizing the entire fight had ended in one go. As Dr. Heron stood beside Dante, our boy moved forward to acquire the box. The people around them felt a wave of unease. They began to speculate that these two might fill the empty spot left by the tower and become the next bosses of Steel Alley. Some even suggested they already were the new bosses. The rumors began to fly. They wondered if these were the same men who took down the tower, the Jawhead crew, and the Hound crew. Seeing the two men with glasses, the prisoners suddenly recognized them. They realized these were the teacher crew. A rush of fear swept through the crowd, but Dr. Heron snapped at them, asking what they were looking at. They shriveled in fear as he demanded to know if they still had business with the box. They quickly denied it, acknowledging that the box and all of Steel Alley now belonged to the teacher crew. Dr. Heron was puzzled by the name, but one of the men insisted that Dante was the teacher, the one who had wiped out all the bosses in the East. Dante realized that the rumors about them had become remarkably exaggerated. However, he decided it was better to be feared than looked down upon. He stood confidently and declared that he was indeed the teacher, the one who disciplined everyone with great teachings. Everyone looked at them with terror, convinced of the legend. Dante smiled, but before he could finish a sentence about lecturing them, a man interrupted with a plea for help. He explained that since they had no boss, thugs from other areas were looting Steel Alley. He begged the teacher brothers to protect them in exchange for a protection fee. Dante felt a wave of disorientation. The term protection fee caused his mind to stall as he struggled to arrange his thoughts. This wasn't what he had expected. Trying to maintain his facade, Dante put on a strange look and asked why a ruthless boss like him would bother protecting them. He told them their situation was unfortunate, but they had to protect themselves. One of the men mustered the courage to say they lacked the strength. Suddenly, Dante's vision blurred. In a moment of cognitive dissonance, he saw an ominous, pleading image of the prisoners in his mind. He sensed their desperation as they begged for help, claiming they didn't even have blankets left and would die during the winter if the looting continued. Dante wondered what he was seeing, feeling a brief flash of static in his mind before he exhaled and snapped back to reality. As a loud crack echoed through the space, everyone turned, realizing it was a gunshot. Wilson and his partner from the Technologia crew stepped into the clearing, grinning as they brandished their weapons. Wilson noted that they were lucky the supply box had landed in such a bossless backwater. The prisoners screamed, identifying them as the thugs who went around looting and threatening people. Dante looked at the guns with a sense of wonder. The Technologia crew ordered everyone to put their hands up, claiming the box was theirs regardless of where it landed. When a prisoner argued that a helicopter had dropped it, Wilson told him to shut up, threatening to put a hole in his stomach. They pointed their guns at Dr. Heron and told the tall guy with glasses to step away. Dr. Heron glared at them, but Dante suddenly grabbed the doctor by his shirt, asking him to wait a second before he stated that they couldn't shoot, almost as if he saw right through their play. The Technologia members became flustered, asking if they were a joke to him. Dante reiterated his claim. In his vision, the gunmen morphed into snails, shaking in fear and merely deceiving the crowd. Dr. Heron asked if he was sure. Dante turned to him, but before he could answer, the doctor dashed toward the Technologia crew. Dante tried to stop him, but Dr. Heron was already a blur of movement. The gunmen began to shake, screaming that they were shooting, but Dr. Heron paid them no mind. Dante screamed in fear for the doctor as the situation turned frantic. The Technologia members tried to pull their triggers, but their hands were paralyzed by fear. They were only using the weapons to threaten. They couldn't actually bring themselves to kill. Before they could fire, Dr. Heron arrived and struck them down in a second. The guns flew from their hands as the men crashed to the ground. Dr. Heron kicked the gun away from Wilson and noted that these idiots really couldn't shoot. Dr. Heron turned to Dante and asked how he had known they wouldn't fire. Behind him, Dante was shriveling in fear, his mind in a state of bewilderment. He wondered how he had known, but he simply told the doctor that he just knew somehow. He realized his vision was still behaving strangely, and he couldn't quite grasp why. On the ground, Wilson began to cry out for an emergency, screaming for his boss to help him. Dante and Dr. Heron looked around in surprise, but there was no sign of the boss. Hidden behind a drum, one arm was glaring at the scene. In the moment the Technologia crew needed him most, their supposed boss was sadly hiding behind his own insecurities and had vanished out of sight. The scene continued as Wilson's voice cracked, screaming into the heavy fog and desperately calling for his boss to save them from the clinical efficiency of Dr. Heron and the looming presence of Dante. Both Dante and the doctor were momentarily taken aback, curious, and perhaps a bit wary of who these men actually considered their leader. As the cries for help echoed, the scene shifted to an eerie, sun-drenched site within a different district. A figure was suspended in a remarkably awkward and defiant position, her feet resting squarely on top of a supply box that had claimed the center of the area. It was the woman known as Kundalini, the second strongest leader of the women's district. The blonde teacher watched in a state of bewilderment, while Gary, the buff woman with the thick neck, looked on, her face twisted into a mask of pure, adrenaline-fueled excitement at the impending challenge. Gary greeted her with a mocking familiarity, noting that it had been a long time. Kundalini glared back, unimpressed by the false pleasantry. When she asked if Gary was here for the box, Gary pointed at the crate and demanded she get off immediately, claiming it as her own. Kundalini remained grounded, calling Gary a greedy woman who had killed and robbed so much, yet refused to leave even a scrap for others. She declared sternly that she would not back down today. Her defiance only served to make Gary happier. The buff woman began to stretch her massive frame, laughing about the fact that a cowardly woman like Kundalini was finally trying to fight back. The women surrounding them were on edge, sensing the weight of the coming storm. Gary turned to her followers, asking if they were ready to rip the heads off the kids in leggings standing behind Kundalini. The ladies looked uncomfortable, dreading the chaos that was about to unfold. However, Kundalini intervened, screaming for everyone to stop. She looked at Gary and proposed that the matter remain between the two of them, rather than having their entire groups tear each other apart. She offered a death battle, a duel to the end. The women in leggings behind her murmured in fear, but the teacher was struck by Kundalini's courage. She recognized that Kundalini was a true leader. In that moment, the teacher recalled the bald woman's warning that Brun's mother had been a good person killed by Gary. She held on to her resentment, wondering if this woman was truly her kidnapper. But for now, she could only watch. Gary accepted the challenge with a savage joy and dashed forward. Kundalini leaped from the supply box just as Gary's fist thundered into the space where she had been. She moved with a mysterious, fluid grace, slippery and fast, dodging every heavy strike Gary threw at her. The teacher watched in awe, amazed by the sheer elegance of her movements. Kundalini teased Gary, suggesting that strength wasn't everything. But the tide turned in an instant. Gary caught Kundalini by the leg, her eyes gleaming with a strange, dark fun. She began to fling her through the air with terrifying force. Kundalini gritted her teeth against the centrifugal pressure and performed a remarkable feat. She used her entire body to wrap around Gary's head, locking her in a skill she called a body lock. As she tightened the chokehold, she questioned Gary's belief that force could solve everything. Gary's face turned a deep, bruised red, her eyes bulging as the air was cut off. From the sidelines, the teacher found herself screaming for Kundalini to finish her. However, Gary managed to wheeze out a shocking truth. She had trained her own tendons and bones to withstand such pressure because so many had tried to assassinate her in the past. With a sudden burst of raw power, Gary grabbed Kundalini's leg and attempted to tear it apart. Kundalini's scream pierced the air as blood gushed from the wound. Horrified, the teacher covered her mouth. The women in leggings could no longer stand by. They dashed forward with sticks, striking Gary repeatedly to force her to release their leader. The teacher joined the chorus, screaming for the monster to die. But as the teacher looked back at Gary's own crew, she realized something chilling. None of them were moving to help her. Their belief in Gary was as fragile as paper. They were simply waiting for her to wither and die. The teacher closed her eyes, unable to witness more, but the sound of heavy impact forced them open. Gary pushed back with a surge of strength that sent the attacking women flying in every direction. Her muscles began to spread and shift strangely as she transmorphed into a monstrous form. She roared at Kundalini, asking if she wasn't the one who demanded a one-on-one fight. Kundalini, witnessing a level of strength she had never fathomed, could only scream for her people to run. It was too late. Gary laid waste to the remaining women, with brutal, steady movements. The teacher fell to the ground, unable to stomach the gore. Once the slaughter was finished, Gary walked toward her, laughing as she grabbed the box. She smiled softly at the crying teacher, calling her her little bird, and promising her a gift. Back at the other drop site, Dante and Dr. Heron finally spotted a figure hiding behind a large can. It was One Arm. They screamed that they had been looking everywhere for him. The Technologia crew was baffled, wondering how they all knew each other. One Arm, however, appeared distorted, almost as if he were blind or deaf to their presence. Dr. Heron, losing his patience, marched over and grabbed the boy by his shirt. He shook him, demanding to know what kind of game he was playing and why he was making such a stupid face. In a fit of anger, the doctor ripped the mask off One Arm's face. Instead of a fierce warrior, they saw a face that was shy, timid, and deeply saddened. Dr. Heron realized the boy was actually sulking. One Arm quickly tried to cover his face again, looking embarrassed, while the Technologia men whispered among themselves, realizing their boss was incredibly handsome. Dante looked at One Arm with an analytical intensity. He sensed something overwhelming. A sight of one arm as a being with wings that was supposed to fly, but was being held down by multiple hands that were pushing him down to stifle his potential. Dante, appearing like a crazy person to those around him, reached out and asked if One Arm wanted help being dragged out from whatever was hooking him. One Arm glared at Dante, and you could see the sad look in his eyes whilst Dante extended an arm of help towards One Arm to liberate him. The response was a sudden, heavy punch, straight to Dante's nose. Our boy fell back toward the ground instantly, clutching his face in pain. One Arm spoke then, his voice cold. He revealed that he had heard everything they said earlier, specifically their threats to kill his sweet potato. Dr. Heron was bewildered, realizing the boy truly had heard them from hundreds of meters away. One Arm then gestured toward the supply box and told Dante he could go ahead and kill the potato. He reasoned that he didn't need that single one anymore, because this box would give him 300 more. The Technologia crew cheered, their excitement reaching a fever pitch. Their boss had returned to his senses, and the tide had turned against Dr. Heron and our boy. That's a cold way to treat a sprout. Dante was still recovering from the heavy blow he had received to his face, his mind slightly clouded as he tried to process the situation. He asked One Arm what he could possibly mean by 300 potatoes. Dr. Heron glared at the boy, equally baffled, and questioned if he honestly believed the supply box was filled with vegetables. He asked One Arm if he had finally lost his mind to think such a thing. One Arm stood defiantly in front of the box, his posture weighted and unmoving. He told Dante that he would never allow such a thing as sharing. He intended to take every single sweet potato for himself. Dr. Heron's patience was wearing thin. He told One Arm to stop being mischievous, and ordered him to bring the box over immediately, as they needed its contents to discuss their plans for the future. Our boy, Dante, tried a softer approach. He smiled at One Arm and suggested that they could simply share the contents together. He reminded the boy that they were friends, hoping the warmth of their bond would bridge the gap. But unsurprisingly, One Arm glared at both Dante and the doctor with a stern, cold intensity. He declared that the box was his alone, and stated bluntly that they were not, in fact, friends. The shock of those words hit Dante with physical force, his face changing color as the rejection echoed through the space. Seeing his companion so dismissed, Dr. Heron began to laugh, though the sound was hollow and quickly turned to annoyance. He began to walk toward One Arm with a deliberate, heavy stride. Even the men standing nearby shivered and drew back as they saw the doctor's approach. Dr. Heron reached down and grabbed one of One Arm's bags from the ground. He demanded to know whose bag it was, forcing One Arm to turn his attention toward him. The doctor mentioned that the teacher had instructed him to throw the bag away, but he had carried it all this distance regardless. He noted that since one arm was speaking such heartless words, it was better to simply throw it away, threatening to discard the boy's belongings right there. One arm was visibly pissed, his eyes locked on his bags as he demanded the doctor give them back, claiming they were his as well. Dr. Heron countered with a deal. If one arm wanted his bags, he had to bring the supply box over. One arm glared back, calling the doctor a greedy bastard. This took the doctor aback. He asked one arm if he truly believed they were doing any of this for their own benefit. In a fit of frustration, he dropped the bag back onto the dirt, declaring that he couldn't understand one arm's idiotic mind anymore. Dr. Heron dashed forward and grabbed one arm by the shirt, his surgical scissors held ready in his other hand. In an instant of pure retaliation, one arm reached out and clamped his hand around the doctor's neck. A ripple of fear and excitement tore through the crowd. The spectators began to scream, realizing that a battle was erupting between the instructors' faction and the Technologia faction. They were terrified and exhilarated, believing this fight would decide who would become the next leader, the next shoulder of their district. The air became frantic as prisoners shouted for the teachers to show their power, urging them to win. Wilson and his crew joined the shouting, mocking the name of the instructors' faction, claiming they had never heard of it. They urged their big boss, One Arm, to give the teachers a taste of who the Technologia crew really was. Dante stood in the center of the chaos, his mind drifting into a state of disorientation as he tried to understand how things had devolved so quickly. His memories began to pull him back to a quiet night by a campfire, where he had once questioned Dr. Heron about the boy's future. He had asked the doctor what would happen if One Arm simply refused to leave this place and chose to remain in the fog. Dr. Heron seemed puzzled as he listened. Dante remembered his confusion over why the boy had run away that day, suspecting that One Arm was trying to avoid the very thought of escaping. He recalled the conversations in the cafeteria where One Arm had told him to shut up and just live his life because there was no way out. He remembered the cell, where the boy warned him that no one would ever come to save them. Even after the failed escape with Rambutan and Lychee, One Arm had been adamant. Anyone who tries to leave this place will die. Dr. Heron had tried to comfort him then, suggesting that perhaps One Arm said those things because he simply didn't know the way out himself. Dante had considered this but raised a more haunting possibility. What if the boy had completely abandoned the concept of freedom after being trapped for so long? He feared that fog addiction might have damaged the boy's mental health to the point where he couldn't imagine a world without the mist. The doctor had listened intently as Dante explained that for One Arm, this gray world was the only reality he had ever known. Dr. Heron admitted that he had felt that same pull toward the mist until Dante had rescued him from the hospital. He described his mind as a mess, especially when he was on the verge of falling into limbo, and noted that the fog often made the desire to feel like an escape from guilt. Despite this, the doctor had made his own choice. He wanted to leave and carry the name tags of his fallen colleagues with him. Dante had exhaled then, realizing that One Arm lacked that same motivation. The boy had no idea what awaited him in the outside world, and leaving posed a genuine hazard to a health that had been shaped by the fog for a lifetime. Dante had concluded that if One Arm truly refused to go, they would have to respect his rules. But in that quiet moment by the fire, Dr. Heron had surprised him. He looked at Dante and vowed that he would save the boy regardless. He expressed a firm belief that they could find a way. He even added that if One Arm dared to refuse, he would simply cut the boy's tendons and take him away by force. Dante sat up, annoyed. He was far from comfortable with the plan Dr. Heron had proposed, questioning why he would even consider such a drastic measure. Dr. Heron simply turned over to sleep, his voice quiet as he explained that there wasn't a specific, complex reason. He simply did not want to leave anyone behind anymore. In that quiet moment, Dante fathomed that the doctor was seeking a form of personal salvation. He remembered how Heron was unable to save his own colleagues in the past, and he understood that Heron wanted to save the boy as a way to settle those old ghosts. The scene shifted back to the heavy tension of the present, where One Arm still held Dr. Heron's neck in a tight, punishing grip. Dante sensed that it would be incredibly difficult for One Arm to grasp the depth of the doctor's feelings regarding loss and abandonment, especially since the boy was not the most articulate person. From the surrounding crowd, bloodthirsty screams erupted. The prisoners were desperate for a fight, urging them to begin. One Arm challenged the doctor to make the first move, but Dr. Heron hesitated, mocking the boy by telling him that if he were so good, he should go first. As One Arm squeezed tighter, Dr. Heron's face showed his growing discomfort. He warned the boy, calling him a son of a bitch, and threatened that if he didn't let go, he would truly cut his tendons. One arm remained focused and annoyed, daring the doctor to try, while threatening to simply end the man's life himself. The crowd grew restless at the lack of action. One man screamed for the doctor to stop talking and punched the boy in the face before he was strangled to death. Another urged him to use his surgical scissors to gouge the boy's eyes out. Dr. Heron listened to these malicious suggestions as they piled up. Someone even proposed hanging One Arm's head in front of the alley as a warning, claiming that no one would dare cause trouble once they saw their leader's severed head. Meanwhile, Wilson and his crew were taunting the other men, claiming they were all talk. They urged One Arm to hurry up and cut the doctor's throat before the scissors could do any damage. One Arm struggled fiercely, shifting his center of gravity to maintain his hold. The screams in the clearing reached a deafening fever pitch. Just as Dr. Heron rolled his scissors up, preparing to deal a fatal counterattack, Dante's voice tore through the noise. He screamed at them to stop. For a brief second, the world seemed to freeze. Both Dr. Heron and One Arm turned their gazes toward our boy, and the entire space fell into an abrupt, heavy calm. Dante was visibly annoyed, his voice booming with authority as he scolded the grown men surrounding them. He demanded to know why they were standing there inciting a murder instead of stopping the fight. The prisoners looked on with fear, intimidated by a voice that sounded like thunder. Dante asked them if they had lost their humanity, and if life had no meaning to them anymore. He turned his attention to the Technologia crew, noting that people had called them bastards just because they carried guns. But as Dante looked at the crowd, he expressed that everyone there was exactly the same, ignorant, stupid, and pitiful. He called them disgusting, observing that people turned into animals the moment they believed they had power over others. He calmly told them that if they wanted to live by the law of the jungle, they should go ahead, but they should never ask for help again, as they were the ones who chose to live by such heartless rules. The prisoners were visibly shaken, their eyes reflecting a newfound fear. Turning back to the fighters, Dante looked at the doctor and asked why he didn't just speak plainly. Dr. Heron was baffled, but Dante pressed on, asking why he hadn't just told One Arm that he truly wanted to help him. One Arm's face shifted into an expression of pure shock. Dr. Heron was still annoyed, striking One Arm's hand away from his neck. He told Dante to forget about it, arguing that the boy didn't even realize he needed help, and questioning how he was supposed to talk to someone behaving like a wild animal. Dante responded softly, saying they could only try their best. He looked at One Arm and calmly asked the boy if he truly wanted to live. He asked if this misty land was really his family, and if he didn't want to see what else the world had in store, things far better than even sweet potatoes. Suddenly, Dante's vision began to distort. A massive spectral chain sprang up between them, and a heavy wooden door appeared, blocking One Arm from his view. It was as if a wall had been built between them, sealing the boy away from Dante's words. Dante tried to call out, but One Arm's voice sounded distant, as if coming from behind the massive block. One Arm asked what Dante was talking about, and questioned if the teacher was trying to push himself to his death. He asked if Dante hadn't already seen the Hollow One. Dante tried to reassure him, stating they weren't planning to cross the fence to the outside, but were heading to the headquarters instead. Upon hearing this, One Arm refused angrily. The chains tightened around the visionary door, sealing it shut as the boy declared he would never go there. One Arm finally revealed the truth behind his mask. He asked Dante if he knew why he hid his face, explaining that this place was for people running away to hide. He revealed that he was a fugitive, that he was actually running from the headquarters themselves. This realization left both Dr. Heron and Dante in a state of shock. The scene then cut away to a different, dark corner of Fogland. Multiple ravens flew through the air, heading toward a space littered with stolen supply boxes. Someone had been guiding them, controlling the birds to gather the wealth. A man reached out and stroked a raven's head, calling the bird Gonzalez and asking if it was hungry. It was Fuzzyback, one of the 7 shoulders of Fogland. He laughed loudly amidst the horde of boxes, having already acquired enough supplies to last for months. It seems the teacher isn't the only one with a loyal crew. The raven that Fuzzyback called Gonzalez fixed its gaze on the entrance of the door before suddenly taking flight. Fuzzyback watched the bird go, questioning where his companion was heading with a tone that sounded almost sad. However, a strange laughter soon replaced his melancholy, as he asked the bird if it had discovered something shiny and beautiful once again. The raven simply continued its flight away from him, leaving the man alone in the dark space. Meanwhile, the scene shifted back to Wilson and the Technologia crew. They stood firmly in front of the other men who remained in that district, manning the area as if to ensure no one could leave. In a quiet corner, our boy Dante was engaged in a private conversation with Dr. Heron and One Arm. They were tucked away inside a glass room, their voices inaudible to the men outside who could only glare at them with growing curiosity. One of the onlookers questioned those around him, wondering what the teacher and the other group could possibly be discussing. The atmosphere grew heavy and tense as the men waited. Just then, a member of the Technologia crew eventually snapped at the curious man, telling him to get out and mind his own business. He insisted that their boss was discussing important matters. The man who had asked the question became angry, screaming back that the district was their territory. Wilson, however, merely watched with a smile. He noted to his crewmates that their boss, One Arm, clearly knew the others. Inside the room, the situation was far from peaceful. Dr. Heron suddenly jumped toward One Arm as if attempting to subdue him. From the outside, Wilson misinterpreted the physical struggle, suggesting to the others that the instructor team and the Technologia team might be forming an alliance. This caused a wave of panic among the onlookers, who began to worry about what such a union would mean for them. Wilson responded with cold indifference, telling them that they were all probably going to die. Back with Dante and his companions, the brawl continued. Dr. Heron screamed at One Arm, demanding to know what he meant by confidential information. The two were locked in a messy struggle. One Arm had a firm grip on the doctor's hair, while the doctor grabbed at the boy's shirt. Finally, Dante flared up. He screamed at them both, demanding to know why they continued to argue like a bunch of children. He insisted that they sit down and have a proper, calm talk. Dr. Heron responded with heated anger, claiming that no matter what was said, the boy refused to listen. He mocked One Arm's insistence on secrecy, asking if he believed he was an FBI agent. In the midst of the shouting, One Arm suddenly changed the subject, asking the doctor how he could be so healthy despite his profession. Dr. Heron screamed back, telling him not to dodge the issue. Dante, remaining the only voice of calm, steadily intervened to summarize what they had learned so far. He noted that One Arm was sure he had been born in this place and did not know his parents. He questioned why the boy felt the need to keep his name top secret, asking if he believed himself to be a superhero. One Arm remained nonchalant, his silence heavy. Dr. Heron added to the summary, noting that the boy had grown up somewhere in the headquarters, but was now on the run for reasons he refused to reveal. Dante pushed further, asking if revealing the secret would put One Arm in danger. After a long silence, One Arm exhaled and gathered his thoughts. He explained that anyone who got in the way of those pursuing him would be in danger. When Dante questioned if he was referring to the management, One Arm admitted he knew little of the government, but he recognized that the man at the headquarters was a monster. Dr. Heron became visibly flustered at this description. One Arm explained that they must be looking for him, and that he felt the desperate need to escape. As he spoke of the management, Dante paid close attention to the boy's heart rate, sensing it booming rapidly against his chest. One Arm doubled down on his stubbornness, refusing to go anywhere near the headquarters, and telling the others to go on without him. Dr. Heron finally let go of the boy, questioning what kind of monster he was talking about. He began to beg One Arm for helpful information, frustrated by the nonsense they were being told, so they could decide whether to change their plans. However, Dante declared to everyone that no matter what happened, the plan remained unchanged. Dante reiterated that the three of them would escape the place together as planned. However, he began to ponder the new risks, realizing they could no longer blindly advance toward the headquarters. He reasoned that they needed to be more careful and find more information about the management team first. As time passed, One Arm moved slowly toward the supply box to open it. Dante and Dr. Heron sat in a corner, with the doctor still grumbling about the boy's idiotic insistence that the box belonged only to him. Dante then called out to the doctor with a specific question, asking if there were cases where a person's potential could be awakened without the influence of the fog. Dr. Heron was taken aback, puzzled by the question. He asked Dante if he was delusional, stating that such a dream could not happen. Dante then suggested that he might have already awakened some kind of ability himself. This caused the doctor to rise with a jolt, his face a mask of bewilderment. He questioned if this awakening was simply the act of Dante shouting in people's faces. Dante responded angrily, denying that was the case. He asked the doctor if he remembered when he claimed to have seen something strange, the moment those two men had pointed their guns at them. He explained to Dr. Heron that he had sensed a soul terrified to the point of paralysis, like a turtle retreating into its shell. That was the intuitive reason he knew they wouldn't pull the trigger. Dr. Heron, however, was far from impressed. He began to complain loudly, asking if Dante was seriously relying on nothing but a feeling, pointing out that such a gamble had almost cost the doctor his life. But our boy was serious. He urged the doctor to listen, explaining that this was not the first time such a thing had happened in Fogland. He revealed that he had sensed something hidden deep within one arm as well, a vision of giant creatures holding the boy down. Dante reasoned that it was perhaps the weight of the massive secrets one arm carried that was crushing him. He described seeing a face without a mouth, a dramatic image of someone who had no choice but to remain silent. To Dante, this recognized reality made perfect sense given their current situation, but he insisted there was more. He had also sensed the despicable, desperate wishes of the people living there, how anxious they were for any kind of leader to guide them. Dr. Heron looked at him with pure bewilderment, asking if Dante was claiming he could actually read minds. The idea caused Dante to pause and ponder the possibility as well. In a fit of skepticism, Dr. Heron challenged him, asking Dante to guess exactly what he was thinking in that very moment. Dante glared at the doctor's face, trying to focus his senses. He thought to himself that Dr. Heron was always so mute and unreadable that there was usually nothing special to see. After a moment, Dante ventured a guess, suggesting the doctor was thinking that Dante should stop talking nonsense. Dr. Heron froze, looking shocked as he glared back at Dante. Despite the accuracy, Dante exhaled and told the doctor to just forget about it, figuring he was simply too tired and mistaking exhaustion for a new power. Deep down, Dante was sure that even if he had awakened his potential, it wouldn't manifest like that. He knew that reading thoughts was a skill his brother excelled at, not him. Suddenly, a funny sound from one arm broke the tension. The boy was looking at the supply box with a look of pure disorientation. He asked how he was supposed to open the heavy thing with only one arm without breaking it. Dr. Heron asked if he needed help, but one arm snapped back, angrily stating he didn't need anything from the doctor. The rejection made the doctor instantly annoyed. He glared at the boy, telling him not to ask for help if he was going to be so ungrateful. One arm told him to shut his mouth, causing the doctor to mutter about someone needing to teach the boy some manners. Dante rose from his seat, deciding it was time to intervene. He realized that if they wanted clues about the executive board, the box was the best place to start. He walked up to one arm and suggested they find a way to open it together. One arm gave him a stern look, reiterating that the box was his alone. Dante simply smiled, saying he knew, but helping each other was simply the right thing to do. One arm stayed silent for a long moment before telling Dante once more that they were not friends and that he wouldn't be escaping the prison with them. Dante remained unbothered. He expressed that even if two people had different desires, they could still be friends. That was how friendship happened, meeting people from all over and gradually learning from them. One arm didn't seem convinced, muttering that friendship should be the same from the beginning, but he finally surrendered. He told Dante he could help open it, but nothing else. Dante moved forward, feeling a strange excitement. One arm added that he might give Dante a single potato as a reward. Dante called out to Dr. Heron to join them, and the doctor hurried over, excited that it was finally time to see the contents. One arm reminded them that since he had 300 potatoes, he could spare one, but they had to loosen the tough string before opening the lid. Together, Dante and Heron worked to get the heavy straps off, throwing them to the ground. They gripped the corners of the box. Dante stood between the doctor and one arm, glaring at the container. He knew the headquarters dropped these at random, and he wondered what could possibly be hidden inside. He slowly pried the lid open to peer inside. As the box opened, the scene shifted to the blonde teacher in a different part of the district. She had opened her own box and was rummaging through a hoard of toiletries and first aid kits. She listed the items with growing excitement: soap, toilet paper, razors, all the essential everyday supplies. She even found a bag of clothes and hoped for shoes. Suddenly, a heavy sound echoed as something fell to the bottom of her box. She was shocked to find what looked like a gun, but upon closer inspection, she recognized it was a drill gun. She was annoyed, thinking that if it had been a real weapon, she would have She continued through the box, finding steel and wooden panels. wondering if the management intended to turn the prisoners into architects. At the very bottom, she spotted a warning label, "Use with caution." She realized the box contained chemical materials. She carried them out and placed them on the ground, arranging them like she was back in a lab. She found oxidizing agents, nitric acid, chlorine, hydrogen peroxide, organic sulfur, and iron powder. As a chemistry teacher, she was far too familiar with these substances. She looked at the dangerous hoard and realized that these weren't just random supplies. They were the exact ingredients needed to make something truly lethal. Dante, One Arm, and Dr. Heron stood positioned in front of the supply box, the weight of the moment hanging heavy as they prepared to unveil its contents. The moment our boy Dante pried the lid open, a variety of materials were revealed, prompting the three of them to sit on the dusty ground and begin rummaging through the hall. As they sifted through the items, Dante reasoned that these were primarily everyday necessities. Dr. Heron, however, sought something more functional, asking if there was anything among the goods that could be used to create something truly reasonable. Dante, maintaining a calm and analytical focus, noted that for the time being, everything within his sight appeared to be nothing more than mass-produced industrial products. While the others analyzed the utility of the haul, One Arm's interest remained singularly fixed on a specific craving. He questioned the others with a hint of desperation, asking if they had spotted any sweet potatoes hidden within the box. Dr. Heron paid the boy no mind, his attention drawn instead to one of the bags. He pulled out a collection of fabric and gestured for Dante to look, pointing out the abundance of clothes. Our boy felt a surge of excitement as he cleared the clothing from the box. He recognized that the civilians in Fogland likely sourced their attire from these very deliveries, as he recalled seeing many people in the dumpling village wearing similar casual clothes. He deduced that since these people lacked any external backing, they must have relied on dividing the contents of these boxes amongst themselves. Dr. Heron then shifted his focus to the building materials, questioning their purpose, to which Dante gathered that most structures in the Misty Lands were likely extensions built from the original prison cells using these very resources. As he sat there, Dante began to fathom how strange the entire situation truly was. He calculated that while the prisoners were busy renovating the prison to build their own small kingdom, the management was not merely turning a blind eye. They were effectively funding the entire system. He sensed that such a reckless distribution of materials was a calculated move, designed to incite conflict between the various factions of Fogland. His deep analytical thoughts were interrupted when Dr. Heron called out to him. The doctor held up a glass bottle containing red aluminum powder, asking the science teacher for his opinion on its use. Dante was momentarily bewildered by the presence of raw chemical ingredients. He admitted that while he majored in life science and was not intimately familiar with every chemical detail, he suspected that many of these substances were poisonous. Dr. Heron affirmed that he was fully aware of the danger, wondering aloud what the prisoners planned to do with such materials and why management would provide them in the first place. Nearby, One Arm continued his frantic search, his focus entirely detached from the chemical mystery as he grumbled about the missing sweet potatoes. Dante and the doctor shared a moment of quiet concern, wondering why a place full of violent outcasts would be supplied with such volatile chemicals. Dr. Heron eventually reasoned that substances like hydrogen peroxide and ethanol could be used for medical purposes if properly diluted, deciding it was best to set them aside for safety. One Arm appeared increasingly distraught, his sadness palpable as he stated that there were still no sweet potatoes in sight. Suddenly, someone tossed a small packet toward him, announcing that the search was over. One Arm grabbed it instantly, but his excitement quickly faded into disorientation as he read the label. Sweet potato seeds. He poured the tiny seeds to the floor, looking solemn and confused. He questioned how these could possibly be sweet potatoes, wondering if the others took him for a fool. Dante glared at the seeds and assured him that they were indeed ghostly sweet potatoes, merely young, tiny ones that needed to be grown. Satisfied by this explanation, One Arm swiftly tucked the seeds into his pocket. Dante then turned back to Dr. Heron, feeling that they had stumbled upon something unbelievably lucky. He pulled out a bottle of shower gel with a triumphant look, while the doctor produced a toothbrush and toothpaste. Dante noted with relief that they would no longer have to endure the hassle of washing with plain cold water. In that moment, a playful yet determined energy took hold of our boy and the doctor. They turned their attention toward One Arm, smiling in a way that left the boy visibly confused about their intentions. Within seconds, they were in the shower room, where Dante splashed water directly onto One Arm's face. The boy's clothes had already been gathered into a basket in the corner, and in response, one arm held his jacket over his face in a fit of disorientation, demanding to know why Dante was spraying him instead of the laundry. Clearly, his idea of hygiene is backwards. Dr. Heron glared at him, bluntly stating that the boy smelled exactly like a stray dog. Dante added that since his arrival, one arm hadn't let a single drop of water touch his skin, which was a habit that needed to change. As one arm stared back in confusion, Dante explained that because he was a human being, he needed to wash. He referenced how figures like Ignaz Semmelweis and Florence Nightingale had proven the vital link between hygiene and survival. Holding the shower head toward one arm like a weapon of health, our boy declared that hygiene was a matter of life for any human being. Dr. Heron carefully applied a dollop of toothpaste to the brush, turning his attention toward one arm with a clinical glare. He noted that the boy was essentially a mobile breeding plant for bacteria, suspecting that even his teeth were likely rotting away. One arm glared back, his anger rising as he stated firmly that such a claim was not true. In a sudden movement, Dr. Heron pushed Dante aside in annoyance, pointing the showerhead directly at one arm. He questioned the possibility of the boy being clean and began splashing water with an annoyed vigor, determined to ensure a thorough washing. As the water sprayed, Dr. Heron voiced his frustration with the lack of basic amenities, questioning what on earth the boy used to wipe himself after using the toilet since there were no rolls of paper to be found. He described the entire place as filthy. These words struck a chord with our boy Dante, who realized he was no exception to the grimy reality of life in Fogland. Dante sensed the weight of the doctor's judgment and reasoned to himself that while the conditions were poor, he had always sought out the best possible alternatives for his own hygiene. One arm, however, remained adamant in his refusal to be washed. He glared at the approaching water and suddenly began to weave through the splashes as if they were lethal attacks. He moved with a surprising grace, dodging every drop, which prompted Dr. Heron to scream that the guy was absolutely crazy. The doctor demanded that one arm stay still, frustrated by the unnecessary spectacle the boy was making. Our boy watched as one arm jumped into the air, twirling with the agility of a cat desperate to avoid a bath. It was a comedic display of defiance. Dante, calculating his next move, locked onto his target and threw a bar of soap onto the wet floor. He concluded that the trap was set. As one arm attempted to land from one of his graceful leaps, he unluckily slid on the soap and tripped, falling badly to the ground. Dr. Heron smiled, recognizing that the target had finally been identified. The bigger they are, the harder they slip. As one arm slowly rose from the floor, trying to gather himself, he glared viciously at Dante and Dr. Heron, asking why they were attacking him. In response, our boy simply poured a full bucket of water over him, screaming that it wasn't an attack. One arm appeared completely baffled, his entire body now littered with soap suds, a state that was actually a good thing for him, though he didn't seem to know it yet. Dante shouted that he had successfully obscured the boy's vision, signaling that their opportunity had arrived. As one arm braced for the impending danger of being cleaned, Dr. Heron dashed in with a sponge, ready to scrub him from head to toe. In the midst of the chaos, the scene shifted momentarily into the quiet depth of one arm's memories. He recalled a different shower room where many young children were bathing together. The atmosphere was one of discomfort. He remembered a little girl in their midst who was crying, her wrist marked with the number 181. A younger version of one arm had extended his hand toward her, placing her hand on the ground as they stayed side by side in the drenching water. They had shared a silent, heavy moment together long ago. Back in the present, the arduous task was finally complete. The three of them walked out of the shower room carrying their buckets of old clothes and leftover soap. One arm emerged looking quite nice in his new clothes, though he was holding a bottle of banana milk as a reward for his forced cooperation. Despite his refreshed appearance, his annoyance was palpable. Dr. Heron leaned back, exhausted, mentioning that even his grandmother's cats didn't cause this much trouble during a bath. Dante congratulated the doctor on a job well done, though he glared at one arm, wondering if the boy suffered from some kind of aquatic syndrome to have screamed so loudly. He gathered that, luckily, the boy had a fatal weakness for the food he now held in his hand. One arm was still pissed from the harassment, and he told the others not to try such a thing on him again. Dr. Heron laughed, asking if that was a foil injector response, which made Dante chuckle. Dante turned to one arm, mentioning how a clean body felt so much more refreshed, especially while wearing an outfit he liked and drinking delicious milk. He teased the boy, asking if his uncle smelled good now. One arm simply sucked on his drink, refusing to give a verbal response in his annoyance. Dante punched him playfully on the shoulder, telling him he looked much more handsome now, the very epitome of a captivating beauty. He joked that One Arm would become extremely famous once he went to school, provided he took good care of himself and bathed every day. Dr. Heron joined in the teasing, noting that One Arm now looked exactly like a bad guy from high school, which was a very chic aesthetic. They continued to poke fun at him, suggesting he probably rode a motorbike and had tattoos, even jokingly telling him to quit smoking. As they began to walk away from the shower room, Dante inhaled deeply, sensing the nice scent of the civilized world on his clean skin. However, the light moment was cut short as Dr. Heron glanced toward a corner and noticed something unexpected. The residents of FOGLAND peered from the shadows, glaring at the group with a cautious intensity, as if they were terrified to emerge from their hiding spaces. Dr. Heron, sensing the growing eyes upon them, called out to the teacher to suggest that they should avoid wearing casual clothes unless there were actual problems with their laundry. Dante was a bit taken aback by the suggestion and glared at him in surprise. The doctor reasoned that the three of them dressed in such a manner would inevitably attract too much attention, but our boy was far too relaxed to worry. Dante questioned who would even care, suggesting that he didn't think anyone in such a place would dare to touch them. As he spoke, Dante continued to hype his companions, noting that they had the white-coated warrior, Dr. Heron, and the wild man, One Arm, in their midst. One Arm simply glared at him while he talked, maintaining his usual silent intensity. Dante felt a wave of genuine excitement, wondering if his mood was lifted because they had finally taken a bath, or perhaps because they had breathed in a small taste of the outside world. He recognized a deep peace within himself that he had never experienced before, and felt sure that, in the end, the whole team was finally united. Suddenly, a crow perched on his shoulder, catching him completely off guard. At first, Dante didn't even take note of the bird, remaining lost in his own world as he reminisced about the ultimate duo of the teacher's team. The peace was shattered when Dr. Heron asked what the hell was on his shoulder, causing Dante to turn his gaze directly into the eyes of the bird. Our boy shook in sudden fear as the crow jumped from his shoulder, and he began to scream frantically that the creature had scared him to death. Though the crow initially flew away, it strangely circled back toward him. Dante continued to yell, calling the bird a bastard and claiming it had almost made his heart fall out of his stomach. Dr. Heron told Dante to speak quietly, complaining that the teacher was being far too noisy. Dante, still very much afraid, continued to shout at the crow to get out of there. While Dante dealt with the bird, Dr. Heron began scratching his chin, appearing quite bewildered. He mentioned how itchy he felt, questioning why he would feel that way immediately after taking a shower. One Arm, on the other hand, remained perfectly calm amidst the noise, until his gaze shifted. He called out to Dante, drawing our boy's attention away from his fear of the bird. One Arm pointed toward the side, warning Dante that something was behind him. Dante turned his attention to where the boy was pointing, and was instantly distraught by what he saw. It was as if his peaceful world had suddenly collapsed. In that exact moment of realization, multiple crows began to fly out from the place One Arm had indicated. From the shadows behind the birds, the fuzzy back emerged from the corner. Dante stood there, almost speechless and unable to move his body, as he glared at the terrifying figure. The fuzzy back stood glaring down at him, wearing a very strange and unsettling smile. The situation had turned cold and frightening in an instant, and our boy was now standing face to face with a looming threat. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome to the family. I recap the Manhwa stories I'm genuinely hyped about, and I'm glad you're along for the ride. Definitely dive into the rest of the channel to find more series that spark your interest, and don't forget to drop a like and a comment to help the community grow. We are pushing for 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I know that with you guys, we're gonna crush that goal. Thanks for showing love, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.